Chapter 1. The Man Before the Langham. It was in the spring of 1889, during those unsettled weeks when winter seemed reluctant to release its hold upon London, that I became involved in one of the most singular cases ever brought before my friend Sherlock Holmes. The morning had begun with rain. By noon it had withdrawn into a grey mist which clung to the rooftops and softened the passing carriages into dark, lumbering shapes. I had called at Baker Street shortly after breakfast and found Holmes stretched upon the sofa in his dressing gown, his long fingers pressed together beneath his chin. Chemical apparatus covered the table. The room smelled of tobacco, acid and burnt wool. "You have been experimenting again," I said. "A minor investigation." "Concerning what?" "An actor came to me yesterday. He claimed that his dresser had attacked him backstage and presented a blood-stained cuff as evidence." "Was it blood?" "No. Red wine, boot polish and candle soot, the mixture used as stage blood in the theatre's production of Macbeth. Then he had stained the cuff himself." "Precisely. He wanted an excuse to dismiss the dresser without paying him." Holmes dropped his notes into the fire. "What did you tell him?" "That the dresser had a better case than he did." I laughed and turned toward the window. Below us, Baker Street shone beneath the rain, its pavements crowded with black umbrellas. I studied him. I had seen this before. Holmes took a slow sip of tea, then set the cup upon the table with sudden decision. "You require a case," I said. "I require a problem. Crime is only one means of providing it." I suggested luncheon, but he declined. "You go, Watson. Your appetite has always shown an admirable independence from your circumstances." I left him shortly before 2 o'clock. I had intended to return directly to Kensington, but remembered that I required a particular preparation for one of my patients. It was not commonly stocked, and I knew of only one chemist near Oxford Circus who could provide it. That small decision placed me before the Langham Hotel at precisely 27 minutes past 3. I am certain of the time because I had stopped beneath the awning of the chemist's shop to compare my watch with the clock above the hotel entrance. The rain had begun again, though lightly, and the traffic moved slowly along the wet street. A solitary man stood upon the opposite pavement. I recognized him at once. His name was Edmund Vale. I had met him twice at the Albion Club during the previous month. Our acquaintance was slight, consisting of no more than a shared table, a newspaper passed between us, and perhaps 20 minutes of conversation. Yet he was not a man easily overlooked. He was a little above middle height and dressed with severe elegance. He wore a charcoal overcoat, a narrow-brimmed hat and pale gloves. A short dark beard sharpened an otherwise unremarkable face. His most distinctive possession was a silver-headed walking stick, which he carried beneath his left arm. Vale appeared to be waiting for someone. He consulted his watch, looked toward the hotel entrance, and then turned his attention to the passing carriages. There was a nervous quality to the movement. At the club I had found him composed almost to the point of coldness. The man before me shifted his weight twice and glanced over his shoulder. I had stepped from beneath the awning when a hansom cab drew up beside him. The cab had not stopped completely when the door opened. A hand appeared. There were 3 shots. The first struck Vale in the shoulder and turned him half around. The second entered his chest. The third shattered the window behind him. For one suspended instant, the street became perfectly still. Then Vale fell. The horse reared. The driver brought his whip down sharply, and the cab lurched into the traffic. Someone screamed. I ran toward the fallen man. At that moment, I still believed he was Edmund Vale. Chapter 2. There were 7. A constable shouted for the cab to halt, but 2 omnibuses had moved between it and the pavement. I caught only a glimpse of its rear wheel before it disappeared into the mist. Vale lay upon his back with one arm folded beneath him. His hat had rolled into the gutter. Blood spread rapidly across his waistcoat. "I am a doctor," I said to the gathering crowd. "Stand back. Give him air." A hotel porter helped me loosen his collar. I pressed my hand against the wound, though one glance had told me the truth. The bullet had passed through the upper chest. His breathing came in short, wet gasps. His eyes opened. They were not the eyes I remembered. At the Albion, Vale's eyes had seemed pale and almost colourless behind his spectacles. These were brown. I assumed the difference was caused by the absence of his tinted lenses, which lay broken beside him. "Mr. Vale," I said, "can you hear me?" His gaze moved toward my face. For a moment, recognition appeared within it. "Doctor." "Yes. Watson. We met at the Albion Club." His fingers closed around my sleeve with surprising strength. There were. He coughed. Blood touched his lips. "Do not try to speak." His grip tightened. 7. What? There were 7. Do you mean 7 men? His eyes moved past me, searching the faces gathered above him. Then his hand slipped from my sleeve. I felt for a pulse, though I knew there would be none. A woman pushed through the crowd. She was young, perhaps 25, and wore a dark green traveling dress. Her face had gone entirely white. "Edmund." She dropped beside the body before I could stop her. "Oh, God. Edmund." "You know this gentleman?" asked the constable. She stared at him as though the question were an insult. "He is Edmund Vale. He is to be my husband." The constable removed his helmet. "I am sorry, miss." She reached toward Vale's face but stopped before touching him. "No," she whispered. "No, this cannot. I was meant to meet him inside." A second man forced his way forward. He was short and broad, with a flushed face and a gold watch chain stretched tightly across his waistcoat. "What has happened?" The constable blocked his path. "Stand back, sir." "That is my clerk." The young woman looked up. "Your clerk?" "Mr. Vale. He works for me." "He does no such thing." The broad man stared at her. "I beg your pardon." "Edmund is a partner in a shipping concern." "Shipping?" The man gave a confused shake of his head. "He has been my senior clerk for 6 months." A murmur passed through the crowd. The constable looked from one to the other. Before either could speak again, a third voice came from behind us. "Vale." An elderly gentleman stood at the edge of the pavement. He supported himself upon an ebony cane and regarded the dead man with astonishment. "I played cards with him last night." The young woman rose. "That is impossible." "I assure you, madam. He was with me last night." The old gentleman blinked. "Until what hour?" "Until 11. He entered the Albion Club shortly after 10. The woman's grief gave way to anger. "You are mistaken." "My eyesight may be failing, madam, but I sat opposite the fellow for 2 hours." More policemen arrived. The crowd was pushed back, and the street slowly returned to motion around us. The dead man remained at its centre, like a stone around which a river had divided. Inspector Lestrade appeared 20 minutes later. His narrow face tightened when he saw me. "Dr. Watson," he said. "I might have known. I happened to be present." "You generally do when a simple matter is about to become complicated." He crouched beside the body. "You saw the shooting." "I saw the hand and the weapon, not the man's face." "And the cab?" "Black. No visible number. The driver wore a grey coat." "Half the cabmen in London wear grey coats." "So I feared." Lestrade searched the dead man's pockets. He found a wallet, a silver watch, 2 hotel keys, a packet of letters and a card case. Every card bore the same name. Mr. Edmund Vale. Vale and Mercer commercial agents. Lestrade handed one to me, so there is no question of identity. The young lady and two gentlemen all recognized him. Good. Then at least we know who was killed. I looked down at the dead man. A pale line crossed the bridge of his nose where his spectacles had rested. The short beard was neatly trimmed. His clothes were expensive, though the cuffs showed more wear than I would have expected. His last words may be important, I said. Lestrade looked up. What did he say? There were 7. 7 what? He died before he could tell me. Lestrade sighed. 7 shots would have been useful. 7 murderers seems excessive. The young woman stood several yards away, supported by the hotel manager. The broad man who claimed Vale as his clerk was speaking urgently to a constable. The elderly clubman remained near the entrance, visibly offended that anyone had questioned his memory. 3 people. 3 accounts. 1 dead man. I bent and retrieved the broken spectacles from the pavement. 1 lens had cracked but remained within its frame. I held it toward the grey afternoon light. It was not tinted. I handed the spectacles to Lestrade. The glass was perfectly clear. Chapter 3. Plain glass. Less than an hour later, I was once again climbing the 17 steps to our sitting room in Baker Street. Holmes had not moved from the sofa. His eyes remained closed as I entered. You have blood upon your left cuff, he said. A man has been murdered. That explains the blood, though not your expression. What is wrong with my expression? It is the face you wear when the facts have offended your sense of order. He opened his eyes. Who was killed? A man named Edmund Vale. Holmes sat up. 12 people saw him die, I said. And yet each of them appears to have known a different man. For the first time in 2 weeks, I saw life return to his face. Excellent, he said softly. A man is dead, Holmes. That is unfortunate. But the problem, Watson, the problem is magnificent. Tell me everything. I gave him the account as precisely as I could, Vale waiting before the Langham, the arriving hansom, the 3 shots, the dying man's final words and the conflicting claims made over his identity. Holmes interrupted only twice. Which hand held the walking stick? His left. And when he seized your sleeve? His right. Continue. When I had finished, he rose and crossed to the window. The woman, he said. Describe her. About 25. Dark hair. Grey eyes. Well dressed, though not extravagantly. Her grief appeared genuine. Grief frequently is. Accuracy less so. The man who called Vale his clerk was perhaps 50. Short, heavy, prosperous. The older gentleman from the Albion Club I have seen before, though I do not know his name. And your own acquaintance with Vale? I met him twice. You spoke with him? On both occasions. For how long? Perhaps 20 minutes the first time. 10 the second. What did you discuss? India. The Afghan campaign. He claimed to have travelled through Bombay. Did he possess any knowledge of the place? Enough to carry a casual conversation. Did he know that you had served there? It arose during our conversation. How? I considered. He saw the way I held my left arm and asked whether the injury had been caused in military service. Holmes gave me a thin smile. A safe opening. Half the gentlemen in your club have either served or wish others to think they have. What else? He spoke of shipping, insurance, the difficulties of moving cargo through the Suez Canal. Nothing personal. I do not recall. Wife, parents, childhood, school? No. Friends? No. Specific journeys? He mentioned Bombay. He mentioned a city known to every schoolboy with an atlas. Did he name a street, a hotel, a regiment, or a man he had met there? I searched my memory. No. Holmes turned from the window. You spoke with Edmund Vale for half an hour and learned nothing about Edmund Vale. I had no reason to interrogate him. Precisely. Ordinary conversation allows a careful man to appear open while revealing nothing. He dressed rapidly. Within minutes, the languid figure in the dressing gown had disappeared, replaced by the familiar angular form in the long grey coat. Where are we going? To examine the dead. You might have warned me before I made myself comfortable. Comfort, Watson, is very often the enemy of progress. He ignored this and reached for his hat. Lestrade had arranged for the body to be taken to a police mortuary not far from Great Marlborough Street. We found him there with a police surgeon named Dr. Harcourt, a grave and sandy-haired man whom I knew slightly by reputation. Lestrade's expression darkened when Holmes entered. Watson, he said, I told you this was a police matter. You told me nothing of the kind. I intended to. Holmes removed his gloves. Then we are fortunate Watson did not remain long enough to hear you. I suppose you want to see him. Presently. First, I should like the dead man's spectacles. Lestrade opened a small evidence box and handed them to him. Holmes held the spectacles toward the light, breathed upon each lens and studied the frames through his magnifying glass. Then he placed them upon his own nose and looked across the room. Plain glass, he said. So I discovered, I said. No correction. No tint. They were worn for appearance, not vision. You believe they were part of a disguise. I believe nothing yet. Belief is the enemy of observation. He removed them and inspected the damaged arm of the frame. The spectacles are new, cheaply made, though designed to appear expensive. There is adhesive near the bridge. Adhesive. Enough to suggest that something was attached here until very recently. I leaned closer. A false nose. Possibly. Or merely a support intended to alter the position of the frames. Holmes returned the spectacles to Lestrade. And now the body. Holmes looked toward the figure beneath the white sheet. Let us see how much of Edmund Vale remains. Chapter 4. Come as Vale. The body lay beneath a white sheet upon a stone table. Death had altered him less than I expected. Without the urgency of the street around him, he appeared smaller. The beard that had seemed so distinctive now looked strangely severe upon his pale face. They bore none of the marks I would have expected upon those of a shipping merchant, a clerk, or a former cavalry officer. Whatever occupation the dead man had followed, it belonged to none of the lives attributed to Edmund Vale. Holmes moved to the face. With a pair of forceps, he took hold of the beard beneath the chin and pulled gently. It shifted. Lestrade leaned forward. Holmes applied a small amount of spirit from Harcourt's cabinet. A moment later, he lifted the entire beard away. Beneath it, the skin was smooth. Lestrade swore. Holmes set the beard upon a metal tray. Human hair upon lace, he said. Excellent workmanship. It would survive rain and close inspection. He was in disguise, Lestrade said. He wore a beard that was not his own. That is an observation. Disguise implies that he wished to conceal his identity. It is equally possible that he wished to acquire one. Holmes studied the dead man's hairline. He touched the temples and then wiped his fingers upon a white cloth. A dark stain appeared. His hair was dyed, I said. Recently. Harcourt examined the roots. His natural color is fair. Then Edmund Vale's dark hair, dark beard and spectacles were all false, said Lestrade. We find his real name, and we find the motive. Perhaps. You disagree. I am waiting for you to say something with which disagreement is possible. Lestrade's narrow face reddened. Holmes continued his examination. The dead man's clothes had been placed neatly upon a nearby chair. He inspected each garment, turning out pockets and running his fingers along seams. The coat had been made by a respectable tailor in Jermyn Street. The trousers came from the same establishment. The waistcoat, however, carried no maker's mark. Odd, I said. A man who paid for such a coat would hardly economize upon the waistcoat. Holmes held it toward the light. He did not. The stitching was fine, but several interior seams had been altered by hand. Holmes inserted a finger beneath the lining and drew out a narrow strip of folded paper. Lestrade seized it eagerly. The paper bore only a few words. Thursday, 3:20. Langham. Come as Vale. Come alone. There was no signature. Murder arranged in writing, Lestrade said. That is helpful. Very. You sound doubtful. I am doubtful whenever a murderer provides the police with exactly what they require. Holmes held out his hand for the note. Lestrade reluctantly returned it. The victim was told to come as Vale, I said. Yes. Then Vale was never his real name. That appears likely. And the sender knew about the disguise. Holmes looked again at the false beard. More than knew about it. The sender expected our dead man to possess the means of becoming Vale. Lestrade took out his notebook. We begin with theatrical costumiers. There cannot be many who produce work of that quality. A sensible beginning, Holmes said. Lestrade paused, suspicious of the compliment. What will you do? Speak with the people who knew Edmund Vale. The witnesses are still at the Langham. Have you kept them apart? As far as possible. Excellent. If 3 people tell 3 different truths about Edmund Vale, then perhaps the lie is Edmund Vale himself. Chapter 5. The Woman Who Loved Him. We returned to the hotel. The rain had stopped, but the pavement remained dark with moisture. A constable stood near the place where Vale had fallen. Sawdust had been scattered over the blood, though a reddish stain remained visible beneath it. The hotel manager provided us with a private sitting room. The young woman waited inside. She stood when we entered. Her face was composed now, though grief had left a rawness around her eyes. Lestrade made the introductions. Miss Clara Whitcomb, he said. Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Her gaze moved to me. You were with him when he died. I was. Did he suffer? There are occasions when the truth serves no kindness. No, I said. It happened very quickly. She nodded and sat down. Holmes took the chair opposite her. You were engaged to Mr. Vale. For 3 months. And had known him for nearly 6. Where did you meet? At a concert given by the Lydian Society. My aunt introduced us. Your aunt knew him. She had met him once at a charitable dinner. Who introduced him to your aunt? Clara hesitated. I do not know. Holmes leaned back. Tell me about him. What do you wish to know? Anything that belonged to him before he met you. The question appeared to confuse her. He had travelled extensively. Where? India, Egypt, France. Where was he born? In the north. Where in the north? He rarely spoke of it. His parents? Dead. Brothers or sisters? None. His school? I do not know. His first employment? Mr. Holmes, I fail to see how these questions relate to his murder. They relate to Mr. Vale. At present, I am not convinced that the murdered man was Mr. Vale. Her expression hardened. I knew the man I intended to marry. Then you will be able to describe him. Was he left-handed or right-hand? Left-handed. You are certain. He wrote with his left hand. Holmes glanced at me. Did he smoke? Never. Drink? Very little. Did he wear spectacles at all times? For reading and in bright light. His eyes? Blue. His voice? Low. Quite soft. Did he bear any scars? A faint color entered her face. One beneath his left ear. You saw it? Yes. Clearly? Yes. Holmes's tone softened. Miss Whitcomb, the man who died outside this hotel had brown eyes. He had no scar beneath the left ear. His beard was false, his hair was dyed, and his spectacles contained plain glass. She stared at him. For several seconds she did not move. Then she shook her head. No. I examined the body myself. No. I am sorry. You are mistaken. I am not. She stood so quickly that the chair struck the wall. I saw Edmund fall. I saw his coat, his face, his walking stick. You saw a man dressed as Edmund Vale. Her hand closed around the back of the chair. Why? That is what I intend to discover. She looked from Holmes to me, searching for some contradiction. I could offer none. At last, she whispered, if that man was not Edmund, then where is he? Holmes regarded her in silence. From the adjoining room came the raised voice of the broad man who claimed Vale as his clerk. Beyond him waited the elderly gentleman who had played cards with Vale at the very hour Clara insisted he had been with her. Holmes rose. That, Miss Whitcomb, may not be the correct question. What do you mean? He glanced toward the closed door. We have 3 witnesses. Each recognizes Edmund Vale, yet each describes a different man. Their accounts place him in 2 locations at the same time, and the body matches none of their descriptions completely. Holmes picked up his gloves. The question is not where Edmund Vale has gone. He looked back at her. The question is whether he ever existed at all. Chapter 6. The Clerk. Mr. Josiah Mercer entered the room with the air of a man who considered delay a personal affront. He was the broad, red-faced gentleman I had seen upon the pavement. His clothes were expensive, his boots highly polished, and his gold watch chain sufficiently heavy to restrain a small dog. I have already given my statement, he said. To Inspector Lestrade, Holmes replied. I should like you to give it to me. And you are? Sherlock Holmes. The name altered Mercer's manner, though not pleasantly. His irritation gave way to caution. I know your reputation. Then we have saved time. Mercer lowered himself into the chair Clara had vacated. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his forehead. I do not see what more I can tell you. Edmund Vale was employed by my firm. He was shot. I witnessed the result. You are the Mercer of Vale and Mercer. Mercer's eyes narrowed. There is no Vale and Mercer. I conduct business under my own name. Then the Mercer named upon the dead man's card was not you. No. Yet you are certain the victim was your clerk. I saw his face. You saw a dark beard, spectacles, and clothing which you associated with your clerk. I spoke to Vale almost every day for 6 months. What work did he perform? He kept the accounts. Was he competent? Exceptionally. Right hand or left-handed? Right hand. You are certain? Of course I am certain. His desk stood directly outside my office. Holmes glanced at Lestrade, and yet Miss Whitcomb saw him write with his left. Mercer gave a dismissive movement of one hand. I cannot answer for what that woman imagined she saw. You had never heard of her? Never. Did Vale speak of marriage? He spoke very little of anything. Did he smoke? Continually. Cheap black cigarettes. The smell penetrated the entire office. Miss Whitcomb had insisted that Vale never smoked. What color were his eyes? Mercer frowned. Grey, I think. His voice? Rather high. Nervous. He cleared his throat before speaking. Any scars? Not that I saw. Holmes took out his notebook, though I noticed that he wrote nothing. How did Vale enter your employment? He answered an advertisement. You examined his references? Naturally. From whom? A firm in Liverpool, Ashcombe Brothers. And you wrote to them? I received a reply confirming 5 years of service. Did you meet any representative of Ashcombe Brothers? No. Did you communicate by telegram? There was no need. Have you conducted business with them? Not directly. Holmes closed the blank notebook. What happened at your office today? Mercer shifted in his chair. Vale failed to arrive. Was that unusual? He had never previously missed a morning. At what hour did you become concerned? I did not become concerned. I became angry. At 2:30, a messenger delivered a note informing me that Vale would meet me at the Langham at 3:15. Why there? The note did not say. Do you have it? Mercer removed a folded paper from his waistcoat. Holmes compared it with a note found inside the dead man's clothing. The handwriting was different. Mr. Mercer, I must speak with you regarding a serious irregularity in the company accounts. I shall be before the Langham Hotel at 3:15. You arrived after the shooting, Holmes said. Only minutes after. And found your clerk dead? Yes. Were there irregularities in your accounts? Mercer's face darkened. None. Then why did the note alarm you? I did not say it alarmed me. You crossed London in the rain to meet a clerk who had failed to attend work, rather than ordering him to come to your office. Alarm seems a reasonable word. Mercer folded his hands over his stomach. I wished to discover what he meant. Holmes placed the note upon the table. Did Vale have access to company funds? He kept the ledgers. He did not control the accounts. That was not my question. Mercer's lips tightened. He could prepare transfers. All payments required my signature. Could he imitate it? I would not know. But the possibility has occurred to you. Mercer said nothing. Holmes rose. We shall visit your office. There is no reason. There is every reason. Your clerk has been murdered after summoning you to discuss irregularities in your accounts. You may accompany us, or Inspector Lestrade may obtain the necessary authority. Lestrade nodded with rather more enthusiasm than was required. Mercer looked between them. Very well. One more question, Holmes said. Where did Edmund Vale live? Bloomsbury. Russell Square, I believe. You believe? I never visited him. Did anyone at your firm? Why would we? Holmes opened the door. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Please wait outside. The next witness claimed to have spent the same evening with an entirely different Edmund Vale. Holmes watched Mercer leave. The curious thing, Watson, he said, is that I suspect both witnesses are telling the truth. Chapter 7. The Card Player. The older gentleman from the Albion Club entered next. I recognized him now as Colonel Arthur Beaumont, a retired cavalry officer known for his rigid habits and considerable skill at whist. He greeted me courteously before regarding Holmes with open curiosity. I wondered when you would appear, he said. Why? Watson was there. I protested, but Holmes's thin smile silenced me. Colonel Beaumont sat with his ebony cane resting across his knees. You knew Edmund Vale? Holmes asked. I knew him as well as anyone at the Albion did, which is to say hardly at all. How long had he been a member? 5 months. Who proposed him? A fellow named Cartwright, Vale's business partner, as I understood it. Not Mercer. No, I have never seen the stout gentleman outside. Cartwright's full name? Henry Cartwright, a broker or merchant of some kind. Was he present this afternoon? No. What address did he give? You would need to ask the club secretary. Tell me about last night. Beaumont rested both hands upon the head of his cane. I arrived at 9. Vale was already there, reading near the fire. At approximately 20 minutes past 10, we began a game of piquet. We finished shortly before midnight. He remained opposite you throughout, except for one visit to the lavatory. At what hour? About 11. For how long? 5 minutes. Perhaps 10. Clara had stated that Vale left her at 11. Describe him. Middle height. Dark beard. Glasses. Thin face. His eyes. I could not say. Those infernal blue lenses hid them. I glanced at Holmes. The spectacles recovered from the pavement were colorless. Blue lenses, he asked. Quite dark. He suffered from sensitivity to light. Was he left-handed? No. He used both hands. He held the cards in his left and played them with his right. Ambidextrous, I suppose. Did he smoke? Cigars. Beaumont sighed and rose from his chair. Look here, Mr. Holmes, are you going to ask me a serious question or not? His voice. Deep. Educated. Somewhat slow. Did he discuss India? Frequently. What did he say of it? That it was full of Indians. Beaumont gave an impatient shrug and turned toward the door. Good day, Mr. Holmes. Did he ever mention Miss Whitcomb? Beaumont halted. He slowly turned and looked Holmes directly in the eyes. Never. Mr. Mercer? No. Where did he live? Mayfair. Not Bloomsbury? Certainly not. He once said that he could walk from his house to the club in 7 minutes. Did you visit him? No. Did you know anyone who had? Beaumont considered this. No. Holmes walked toward the window. Below us, a porter guided a newly arrived family through the hotel entrance. Nothing remained upon the pavement to show that a man had died there less than 2 hours before. Colonel, he said, how well do you observe faces? Well enough. If you saw Vale without his beard and spectacles, would you recognize him? I believe so. Would you stake your reputation upon it? The colonel's eyebrows rose. That would depend upon the circumstances. Holmes opened the adjoining door. Clara stood inside with a female hotel attendant. She had been crying, but had recovered some of her composure. Miss Whitcomb, Holmes said gently, would you join us? She entered. Colonel Beaumont rose at once. Madam, have you ever seen this gentleman? Holmes asked her. No. Beaumont studied her face. Nor I her. You are certain? Entirely, Clara said. Holmes turned to Beaumont. At what hour did you first see Vale last night? As I told you, he was already at the club when I arrived at 9. Clara shook her head. Edmund came to my house shortly before 8. He remained until 11. Then you are mistaken, madam. I am not. I played cards with him. He was sitting beside me. Beaumont's expression became one of grave discomfort. Perhaps the man at the club merely resembled him. He wore the same beard, the same spectacles, and carried the same silver-headed cane. Clara looked at him. The cane. Yes. Did it bear an engraving? A small bird upon the silver. An eagle, I think. A falcon, she said. Edmund told me it had belonged to his father. Beaumont slowly sat down. Holmes watched them both. Did Vale use his cane last night? He asked. He set it beside his chair. Did he appear to require it? No. And with you, Miss Whitcomb? He limped slightly. An old injury to his left knee. The man at the club did not limp, Beaumont said. Clara stared at him. The room became silent. Lestrade was the first to speak. 2 men, he said. 1 at the club and 1 with Miss Whitcomb. At least 2, Holmes replied. And today a 3rd man died in the same disguise. So it appears. Then we have found our answer. 3 criminals using 1 name. Holmes turned toward him. We have found the beginning of an answer. Why would 3 men deliberately construct the same identity? Fraud. What fraud? We shall discover that. And why was one of them murdered publicly? To silence him. Then why summon 2 witnesses who could identify the body? Lestrade frowned. Holmes indicated the 2 notes. The dead man was ordered to come dressed as Vale. Mr. Mercer received a separate message designed to bring him to the same place. Miss Whitcomb was already waiting inside the hotel. Colonel Beaumont happened to be nearby. You believe he was there by arrangement? I asked. Beaumont straightened. I was not. I had an appointment with my dentist in Cavendish Square. Holmes looked at him. At what hour? 4. Yet you arrived nearly 40 minutes early. I prefer punctuality. You prefer an audience, Holmes said softly. Beaumont's face hardened. If you are suggesting. I suggest only that the murderer chose the most public pavement in London and ensured that at least 2 people would immediately name the dead man. To establish his death, I said. Holmes nodded. The man was not killed despite being recognized as Edmund Vale. He picked up the dead man's card. He was killed so that Edmund Vale would be recognized as dead. Clara covered her mouth. Lestrade stared at Holmes. But if Vale is not one man, what exactly died on that pavement? A useful question. Holmes turned the card between his fingers. Someone has spent 6 months creating Edmund Vale. An employer knows him. A woman loves him. A club accepts him. He possesses offices, cards, references, and a history which no one has examined too closely. He has a life, I said. No, Watson. Holmes looked toward the place where the body had fallen. He has evidence of a life. That is not the same thing. Chapter 8. The Missing Bonds. Mercer's offices occupied the 2nd floor of a narrow building near Cornhill. By the time we arrived, evening had begun to settle over the city. The clerks were preparing to leave, but Mercer ordered them back to their desks with a sharpness which revealed the full extent of his unease. Vale's desk stood outside Mercer's private office. It was perfectly arranged. 3 sharpened pencils lay beside a clean blotter. The account books had been stacked by size. A brass calendar showed the correct date. There were no personal letters, no family photograph, and no coat hanging behind the chair. Holmes sat at the desk and opened the upper drawer. Empty. The 2nd contained sealing wax, string, and spare pen nibs. The 3rd was locked. Mercer produced a key. Inside lay a ledger. Holmes opened it. Every page was blank. Mercer leaned over his shoulder. That is not one of ours. Holmes turned the ledger upside down and shook it. A small brass key fell onto the desk. It was new and attached to an oval metal disc. The disc bore a number. 317. A second object followed, a flattened piece of dark modeling wax bearing the impression of another key. Holmes examined both beneath the lamp. 2 keys. Lestrade asked. 1 key and the impression of another. Holmes placed them side by side. The patterns do not correspond. The brass key was recently cut by hand. The wax was used to make a duplicate of a different key. A duplicate of what? Mercer demanded. Holmes looked around the office. Mr. Mercer, where do you keep your company safe? Mercer's face lost its color. He crossed the room without answering and unlocked the door to his private office. The safe stood behind a wooden screen. Its door was open. Inside, 3 shelves were empty. Mercer gripped the edge of his desk. No, he said. Lestrade moved past him. What was kept here? Bonds, transfer certificates, letters of credit. What value? Mercer did not answer. Lestrade seized his arm. What value? Nearly £40,000. Even Holmes was still for a moment. It was a fortune sufficient to ruin not merely a man but an entire company. Vale, Mercer whispered. That damned clerk. Holmes approached the safe. There were no scratches around the lock and no damage to the door. He did not force it, Lestrade said. He did not need to, Holmes replied. He copied the key. Mercer rounded upon him. Then this is solved. Vale stole the bonds. One of his accomplices murdered him. Find the other two men and we recover my property. Holmes knelt before the safe and examined its interior. No. Mercer stared at him. What do you mean, no? The dust upon the shelves has been disturbed evenly. The contents were removed in several batches, not all at once. So your bonds did not disappear today. They have been leaving this safe for weeks. Mercer's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Holmes reached into the rear corner and removed a single torn strip of paper. It was part of a railway luggage receipt. Across it, in faded blue ink, were 3 printed words. Victoria, left luggage. Below them, written in pencil, was another number. 7. Holmes looked at me. The dying man was not counting murderers, Watson. You believe he was directing us. I believe he knew that the number mattered. Then we go to Victoria Station. Holmes rose. For the moment. What do you expect to find there? He placed the torn receipt in his pocket. That depends upon whether the murderer reached it first. Chapter 9. Compartment 7. The evening traffic delayed us badly. Mercer remained at his office with 2 constables while Lestrade sent telegrams to the railway stations and the principal ports. No description could yet be issued for Edmund Vale, since we possessed at least 3 contradictory versions of the man. It was nearly 7 when our cab drew beneath the great iron roof of Victoria Station. The platforms were crowded. Steam drifted between the columns, mingling with tobacco smoke and the damp odour of wool. Porters hurried past with trunks upon their shoulders while departing passengers called final instructions through carriage windows. Lestrade joined us at the left luggage office. I have spoken with the superintendent, he said. He has provided an attendant to assist us. You assume the number refers to a receipt, Holmes said. What else would it mean? That is what we are here to discover. The attendant examined the torn paper. This is ours, he said. Older form. Issued before January. But the number. Missing, sir. Torn away. Lestrade's face fell. Can you trace it? Not without the other half. Holmes took the paper from him. Compartment 7, he said. The attendant shook his head. We don't number the luggage compartments in that fashion. Not the luggage compartments. The cloakrooms. There are private dressing rooms near the first-class waiting hall. Those have numbers. We followed him along the concourse. Compartment 7 proved to be a narrow room containing a washstand, a mirror and a wooden bench. The attendant unlocked it and raised the gaslight. The room appeared empty. Lestrade inspected the cupboard beneath the basin. Nothing. Holmes did not enter at once. He stood upon the threshold, studying the floor. Someone has been here recently. It is a railway station, Lestrade said. That is generally what happens in them. The attendant tells us these rooms are seldom used. Yet the boards have been wiped near the bench, and there is fresh mud beneath the washstand. He knelt. A line of small dark flecks marked the floor. Hair dye, I said. Very good, Watson. Holmes touched the edge of the basin. A brown stain had gathered beneath its rim. Beside it lay 2 short black hairs. They were coarse and unnaturally uniform. From a false beard, I said. Or a false moustache. Lestrade opened the only window. It overlooked a narrow service yard enclosed by brick walls. No one left this way. No one needed to. Holmes examined the mirror, then ran his fingers behind its frame. It moved. He lifted it from the wall. A shallow recess had been cut into the plaster. Inside lay a rectangular wooden case. Lestrade reached for it. Holmes caught his wrist. One moment. A thin wire ran from the case to a nail driven into the side of the recess. Lestrade stared at it. A trap. Possibly an alarm. Holmes followed the wire with his magnifying glass. It disappeared through a small hole in the bottom of the case. He took a pair of scissors from his pocket and cut it. Nothing happened. You carry scissors? Lestrade asked. You carry handcuffs. We each prepare for the difficulties we expect. Holmes removed the case and set it upon the bench. The wire had been attached to a spring mechanism inside the lid. Had Lestrade lifted it, a glass capsule would have shattered over the contents. Acid, Holmes said after examining the capsule. Enough to destroy paper. Someone was determined to keep this hidden, I said. No, Watson. Someone wished it to remain hidden until it could be safely recovered. He opened the case. Inside lay 7 envelopes. Each bore a Roman numeral from I to 7. Lestrade gave a low whistle. The 7. Holmes lifted the first envelope. Perhaps. It contained a single sheet of paper. Monday and Thursday. Mercer's office, 9 until 5. Voice, light. Right hand. Cigarettes. No jewelry. Residence, if asked, Russell Square. The second read. Tuesday and Friday evenings. Miss Clara Whitcomb. Voice, low. Left-handed. No tobacco. Limp when tired. Scar beneath the left ear. Residence, if asked, Kensington. The third read. Albion Club, after 9. Voice, low. Blue lenses. Cigars. Scar upon the right wrist. Residence, if asked, Mayfair. India acceptable. Avoid regimental details. Lestrade read the pages over my shoulder. Good God. Holmes opened the remaining envelopes. The fourth contained instructions for meetings with 5 lending institutions. The fifth described appearances at shipping offices along the Thames. The sixth listed auction houses and private sales rooms. The seventh contained only an address. 14 Bell Yard, Southwark. Beneath it was written, await further instruction. Do not approach the others. There are 7 men, I said. 7 roles, Holmes corrected. We do not yet know whether each was played by only one man. But why make Vale left-handed for the woman and right-hand for his employer? To prevent accidental recognition. If Miss Whitcomb entered Mercer's office and saw a man writing with his right hand, she might notice the difference. The variations allowed the creator to identify which version had been seen. Like marks upon identical cards, I said. Precisely. Lestrade gathered the sheets. This proves a conspiracy to defraud Mercer. It proves that several men were instructed to impersonate Edmund Vale. The empty safe proves the rest. The empty safe proves that Mercer's bonds are missing. Lestrade gave him an exasperated look. Must every fact wait in a separate room until you formally introduce them? Only until I know they belong together. Holmes examined the wooden case. Each envelope occupied a fitted compartment. Beneath the 7th was a narrow empty space. Something is missing, he said. How can you tell? The velvet is less faded here. A small object lay in this compartment until recently. He lifted the case toward the gaslight. A circular impression remained in the fabric. Coin. I suggested. Too large. A watch. Too thin. Lestrade held up the brass key found in Vale's desk. It fitted the impression exactly. Then the dead man came here, he said. He took the key and left the papers. Or someone took the key from here and placed it in his desk beside the impression of the safe key. To make Vale appear responsible for the theft, I said. Precisely. The evidence forms a trail, Watson, and trails may be laid deliberately. Holmes returned the envelopes to the case. Who rented this room? He asked the attendant. No one, sir. These compartments are used by passengers as needed. Who placed the mirror? It has always been there. Holmes showed him the plaster recess. The attendant stared. I know nothing of that. Has anyone used this room regularly? The man hesitated. There was a gentleman. Describe him. Dark beard. Blue spectacles. Silver-handled cane. Edmund Vale, Lestrade said. He came most Tuesdays. Sometimes Thursdays. Alone. As far as I saw. At what hour? Usually around 6. He would enter looking one way and leave looking another. What do you mean? The attendant's embarrassment increased. Different coat. Different hat. Once he had no beard when he left. I assumed he was an actor. Did you ever see his natural face clearly? No, sir. Did he limp? Sometimes. Holmes turned toward me. A dressing room, I said. This is where they became Vale. And where Vale ceased to exist when his work was finished. Lestrade pointed to the 7th envelope. We have an address. Holmes studied the warning beneath it. Yes, he said. And so does the murderer. Chapter 10. Bell Yard. We left the station at once. Bell Yard lay behind a row of warehouses near the river. The neighborhood was poorly lit and nearly deserted at that hour. Number 14 was a narrow house squeezed between a shuttered pawnbroker and a workshop whose broken sign advertised the repair of marine instruments. No light showed behind its windows. Lestrade summoned 2 uniformed constables from the nearest station. One remained in the alley while the other covered the rear entrance. Holmes examined the front door. Recently forced, he said. The lock was intact, but the wood around it had splintered inward. Lestrade drew his revolver. We entered. The passage smelled of dust, damp plaster, and something sharper beneath it. Gas. Holmes covered his mouth with his sleeve. Do not strike a light. He moved through the darkness, found the valve beside the wall and turned it closed. We waited several minutes with the door open before proceeding. The front room was empty. In the rear, we found a small stove, a table and 7 wooden chairs arranged in a circle. Upon 6 of the chairs lay an identical bundle. The 7th stood empty. A dark coat. A narrow-brimmed hat. A pair of spectacles. A silver-headed cane. 6 complete Edmund Vales, and an empty chair for the 7th. Each bundle was complete. Whatever Vale had worn before the Langham was not among them. The dead man wore the missing 7th set, I said. Most likely. Lestrade opened the cupboards. They contained bottles of hair dye, spirit gum, theatrical wax, and boxes of cigars and cigarettes. A shelf held 7 pairs of gloves, each altered to disguise the shape of the hands. On the table stood a framed photograph. It showed Edmund Vale in profile. At least, I believed it did. The beard, spectacles, and hair were unmistakable. Yet the face beneath them had been deliberately blurred during development. Holmes studied it. A pattern, he said. Not a portrait. They were taught to reproduce the outline, the posture, and the clothing. The witnesses supplied the rest. From the floor above came a sound. A slow scrape. Then a footstep. Lestrade raised his revolver and moved toward the stairs. Police, he called. Come down. No answer. A second thud sounded overhead. Holmes looked toward the cold stove. The gas was not intended to kill whoever broke in, he said. What? It was intended to kill whoever remained upstairs. He reached the staircase before Lestrade. We followed. The upper passage was completely dark. A door stood half open at the far end. Holmes pushed it aside with his cane. A man sat in a chair facing the window. His hands had been tied behind him. A cloth covered his head. I crossed the room and removed it. He was alive, but barely. He appeared to be in his 30s, thin and badly bruised. His fair hair was wet with sweat. A strip of adhesive marked the skin beneath his chin where a false beard had recently been torn away. His eyes opened. "Vale?" Lestrade asked. The man recoiled at the name. Holmes knelt before him. "What is your name?" "Jonas," he whispered. "Jonas Pike." "Are you an actor?" The man stared. "How did you? Who tied you here?" "I never saw him." "What did he want?" Pike's breathing became rapid. "What did he want?" Pike closed his eyes. He wanted to know whether anyone else had worn the clothes. Had anyone? Pike hesitated. He asked where the eighth man was. Lestrade leaned closer. "The eighth?" I told him there were only 7. There had always been 7. Holmes glanced at the chairs below. "What were you hired to do?" Pike closed his eyes. "To be him." "Edmund Vale?" "Yes." "For whom?" "The girl. Miss Whitcomb." A flicker of pain crossed his face. "Yes." "You played the man who courted her?" "At first." Pike looked toward the door, as though he expected someone to be standing there. Then it changed. "How?" "Miss Whitcomb began thanking me for letters I had never written. She spoke of conversations I could not remember. Once she thanked me for a gift I had never sent. Another man was visiting her." "I thought so." "Did you confront whoever employed you?" "I tried." "And?" Pike swallowed. "They sent me a photograph." "Of what?" "My sister leaving her house." The room fell silent. Holmes's voice remained calm. "What happened today?" "A message came this morning. It said the work was finished. I was to bring the clothes here and wait." "You came dressed as Vale?" "Yes." "What time?" "A little after 6. "Was anyone here?" "No." "Then?" "Someone struck me from behind." "Did you hear his voice?" Pike nodded. "What did he say?" "He asked where the eighth man was." Lestrade leaned closer. "The eighth?" Pike began to tremble. "I told him there were only 7. There had always been 7. Holmes and I exchanged a glance. "Are you certain those were his exact words?" Holmes asked. "Yes." "Where is the clothing you wore?" "Downstairs. The second chair." Holmes stood. 6 bundles had lain upon 7 chairs when we entered. One was Pike's. The suit worn by the dead man lay at the mortuary. That accounted for all 7 sets. But someone else was moving below, and 6 complete disguises had been waiting within his reach. A board creaked below us. Lestrade spun toward the door. Then glass shattered. We ran downstairs. The rear window stood open. The constable in the alley lay motionless beneath it. Beyond him, a dark figure climbed the wall at the end of the yard. For an instant he turned beneath the gaslight. Dark beard. Glasses. Silver-headed cane. Then Edmund Vale disappeared over the wall. Holmes reached the alley before any of us. The constable lay beneath the open window, blood running from a wound above his temple. I knelt beside him while Lestrade and Holmes continued toward the wall. "He is alive," I called. "Go." The constable had been struck once with a heavy object. His skull appeared intact, and his breathing was steady. I loosened his collar, turned him carefully onto his side and followed the others. Beyond the wall, the alley opened into a maze of narrow passages running between warehouses and riverside workshops. Lestrade stood at the first junction. "Which way?" Holmes had crouched beside a shallow puddle. Several footprints crossed its muddy edge. "He landed here," he said. "Left heel deeper than the right." The limp. An imitation. He shifted his weight deliberately. Holmes followed the prints toward the river. We emerged upon a broader street just as a cab turned the corner at the far end. Its lamps vanished into the fog. Lestrade blew his whistle. An answering call came from somewhere behind us, but there was no carriage close enough to pursue. Holmes walked to the place where the cab had waited. "He had arranged his escape," Lestrade said. "No. How can you know?" "These tracks approach from the east, circle once and stop here. The driver was cruising when Vale hailed him. Then we may trace the cab. If the driver noticed his passenger, a man in a false beard carrying a silver-headed cane." A description shared by every man who has played Vale. Lestrade's frustration escaped him in a sharp breath. "You saw his face." "I saw Vale's face." "That is what I said." "That is the difficulty." Holmes pointed toward the gutter. The fugitive had discarded the silver-headed cane. It lay partly submerged in the dirty water. Lestrade picked it up. "A falcon," I said, examining the engraved bird. "A cheap casting," Holmes replied. "The silver is plate. All 7 canes are identical." He threw it away because it would identify him, or because he no longer wished to be Vale. Chapter 11. The Man Who Played Vale. We returned to Bell Yard. The injured constable had regained consciousness, though he remembered little. He had seen the rear window open and a man begin to climb through. Before he could give warning, the man struck him with the handle of the cane. Jonas Pike remained upstairs. I treated the cut upon his forehead while Holmes questioned him. Without the false beard, Pike bore little resemblance to the man I had seen die. He had a narrow jaw, prominent cheekbones, and pale green eyes. He was perhaps 10 years younger than the corpse. "How were you recruited?" Holmes asked. "A letter came to the theatre." "Which theatre?" "The Adelphi. I had a small part in the Corsican Brothers." "What did the letter say?" "That a private client required an actor for several social appearances. No stage performance. £3 each evening. A generous payment." "I had debts." "What kind?" "The kind that make £3 seem generous." "Who interviewed you?" "A man calling himself Mr. Gray." "Describe him." "Tall, thin, dark coat." He remained behind a screen. "You never saw his face?" "No." "His voice?" "Ordinary." "No voice is ordinary." Pike considered. "Educated?" "London, perhaps." He spoke slowly, as if he had prepared every sentence. "You were given the clothes?" "And taught how to wear them?" "Taught by Gray." "Through written instructions." "What were you told about Edmund Vale?" "That he was a merchant who wished to conduct a courtship without revealing his real identity." "And you accepted that?" Pike looked at him bitterly. "I was an actor earning 12 shillings a week. Men with money have paid for stranger performances." "What were you required to do with Miss Whitcomb?" "I was asked to attend concerts, take tea at her house, walk with her in the park." "Were you instructed to propose marriage?" "Not at first." "But you did." "A later letter ordered me to." "Did you love her?" Pike's jaw tightened. "That has nothing to do with this." "It may have everything to do with it." "I was paid to make her believe in someone who did not exist. Whatever I felt afterward does not improve the act." Holmes studied him for a moment. "When did you first suspect that you were not the only Edmund Vale?" 6 weeks ago. Miss Whitcomb referred to a dinner at which I had never been present. I thought she had confused the date. Then she mentioned that I had stopped limping." "You affected a limp when you were with her?" "Yes." "Did you know why?" "No. It was in the instructions. How did you confirm your suspicions? My payments were left in a locker at Victoria Station. I was ordered to collect the money, return the key and leave at once. 6 weeks ago, I did not leave. Holmes's eyes sharpened. What did you see? A man dressed exactly as I was. The same coat, the same spectacles, the same cane. He entered the private dressing room. Compartment 7. Yes. A few minutes later, a different man came out carrying a case. He had removed the beard and spectacles, but I recognized the coat beneath his arm. You saw him without the disguise. Only from behind. I followed him as far as Cornhill. He entered Mercer's office. And then I returned to Victoria. Another man entered compartment 7 without a disguise. When he emerged, he was Edmund Vale. 2 different men wearing the same face, I said. Pike nodded. After the second man left, I went inside. That was when I found the case and the 7 envelopes. Lestrade stepped forward. You have concealed this for 6 weeks. I did not yet know what crime had been committed. You understood enough to keep taking the money. Pike rose, but weakness forced him back into the chair. I wrote to Gray that I would take no further part. The following morning, a photograph of my sister arrived. Her address was written on the back. Holmes's voice remained quiet. So you continued. What choice had I? Several. Last week, you finally made one of them. Pike looked down at his bound and bruised wrists. I contacted a private detective. His name? Julian Marr. The name meant nothing to me. Lestrade, however, reacted immediately. You know of him? I asked. By reputation. He worked south of the river. Former police clerk. Competent enough, when sober. When did you approach him? Holmes asked. Last week. I asked whether he could discover the identity of Mr. Gray. Did you tell him about Edmund Vale? Not at first. I did not know whether I could trust him. Yesterday we met again at a coffee house near Charing Cross. I told him the name. Pike paused. Marr already knew it. Holmes leaned forward. How? A bank had engaged him to investigate a man calling himself Edmund Vale. Why? Vale had applied for a substantial loan using Mercer's bonds as security. Marr discovered that similar applications had been made elsewhere. For how much? More than £50,000 altogether. For a moment, no one spoke. The bonds had not merely been stolen. They had been used to obtain further credit in Vale's name. If similar applications had been made elsewhere, the fraud might extend far beyond the £40,000 missing from Mercer's safe. What did you tell Marr after that? Holmes asked. Everything. The 7 rolls, the dressing room and the envelopes. I showed him my instructions. Did you show him how the disguise worked? Pike did not answer. Holmes's eyes hardened. You dressed him as Vale. He insisted. He believed that if he appeared as Vale, he could draw out the men behind the scheme. Where did you dress him? Here, last night. I used one of the spare sets. What did he intend to do? He would not tell me. He said he had a lead from the bank inquiry and that Vale's face might take him where his own could not. What time did he leave? Shortly after 6. What did he take? The clothes he wore. Beard, spectacles, cane, everything. Did you see him again? No. Holmes regarded him steadily. But someone else came here. Pike's face changed. This evening. I heard the door below and thought Marr had returned. The man struck me before I could turn. Did you see his face? No. He came from behind. What did he want? Pike hesitated. He knew that another man had worn Vale's clothes. He wanted his name. And what did you tell him? Nothing. But you understood whom he meant. Yes. Julian Marr. Pike nodded. There were 7 men in Gray's design, Holmes said. You gave Vale's face to another. Marr was the 8th man to wear it. But how did he know? Pike demanded. Marr and I were alone. No one saw what we did here. Someone knew, said Holmes. That is the important fact. Pike stared at him. The man questioned me until I could no longer stand. Then he tied me upstairs. I heard him go downstairs, and a few moments later I smelled gas. He intended you to die, I said. Pike said nothing. Pike closed his eyes. Then the man murdered outside the Langham was Julian Marr, Holmes said. The room became very still. Lestrade swore beneath his breath. Marr was never one of the 7, I said. No. He was an intruder wearing their face. And Gray discovered him. Someone discovered him, Holmes corrected. Someone sent him to the Langham, murdered him in public and ensured that Mercer, Miss Whitcomb and Colonel Beaumont would identify the body as Edmund Vale. To make Vale officially dead. Precisely. Then the fraud dies with him, I said. The stolen bonds, the loans, everything can be blamed upon a dead man who never existed. And the detective who came too near the truth is silenced at the same time. Lestrade moved toward the door and called for the constables. I glanced at the false beard and cane abandoned upon the floor. Why did Pike's attacker disguise himself as Vale when he escaped? Because he required another face, Holmes replied. Belliard offered him only one. But Vale had just been murdered in full view of half London. Which makes the disguise dangerous now. He wore it because discovery without it was more dangerous still. Then he knew we were outside. He knew someone was outside. He opened the gas, searched the room and attempted to leave unseen. The constable surprised him. What was he searching for? Whatever Marr may have left with Pike. Pike looked up. He left nothing. Holmes turned to him. Are you certain? He wore the clothes and took my copy of the instructions. That was all. Then your attacker did not find what he expected. Lestrade returned with 2 constables. Pike is under arrest, he said. On what charge? I asked. Conspiracy, fraud, and withholding evidence. We shall decide the particulars at the station. Pike did not resist as the constables raised him. At the door, he looked back at Holmes. I did not know Marr would be killed. No, Holmes said, but someone knew exactly where he would go. The constables led Pike away. It was after 10 when we left Belliard. The fog had thickened, reducing the street lamps to pale yellow stains. Holmes walked quickly, his head lowered and his hands clasped behind his back. You are pleased, I said. Not pleased. Interested, then. Deeply. Because there were 7 Vales. Because there were never 7 Vales. There were 7 fragments of one. He glanced at me. Each actor received only the manners, habits, and acquaintances required for his particular role. No single man knew enough to expose the whole. Until Pike found the envelopes. And brought Marr into the affair. Marr became the 8th. He borrowed the appearance. Watson. He was never part of the design. Then what troubles you? Holmes stopped beneath a street lamp. The speed of the response. Pike told Marr the whole truth yesterday. By this afternoon, Marr was dead, Pike had been condemned to the gas and Belliard had been searched. Marr may have been followed. Perhaps. Or Pike was watched. Perhaps. You do not believe him. I believe that fear has made him truthful. Whether it has made him entirely truthful remains to be seen. He resumed walking. Tomorrow we shall examine Marr's office. And discover how Gray learned of the 8th man. We shall discover what Marr learned before Gray silenced him. We did not have to wait until morning. A police messenger stood upon the steps of Baker Street with a telegram from Lestrade. Holmes tore it open beneath the street lamp. The message contained only 2 lines. Mar's office broken into. Premises searched. Body of night watchman found inside. Chapter 12. The Dead Watchman. Julian Marr maintained an office above a stationer's shop in Chancery Lane. We arrived shortly after 11. 2 police constables stood at the entrance, and despite the lateness of the hour, a small crowd had gathered beneath the windows. Lestrade met us upon the stairs. "You took your time." "I received your message 20 minutes ago," Holmes replied. "That has never prevented you from arriving before me." Lestrade led us to the upper floor. The door to Mar's office had been forced. The wood beside the lock had splintered, and a broken section hung loosely from the frame. Holmes paused upon the landing. "Broken from the inside," he said. Lestrade stopped. "Nonsense." Holmes pointed to the fragments scattered across the landing. If the door had been forced inward, the greater part of the splintering would lie inside the room. Then whoever broke it was already inside, and wished us to believe that he had entered by force. The office consisted of 2 small chambers. The first contained a desk, 3 filing cabinets and enough scattered paper to cover most of the floor. Drawers had been overturned. Books had been pulled from their shelves and shaken open. Even the cushions of the 2 chairs had been cut apart. The second room served as Mar's sleeping quarters. The night watchman lay between the bed and the window. He was an elderly man in a dark uniform. One arm remained extended toward the bell rope beside the door. A single blow to the back of his head had killed him. "This is Alfred Sykes," Lestrade said. "He watched the building between 8 at night and 6 in the morning." "What time was he found?" I asked. 10:15 this evening. The stationer returned for a ledger he had forgotten. I examined the body. Rigor mortis was well established, and the skin had cooled throughout. "He died last night," I said. "I cannot place the hour more precisely." "Before Marr was shot," Lestrade said. "While Marr was away from this office meeting Jonas Pike," Holmes replied. "Or shortly after he returned." Lestrade nodded. Sykes must have surprised whoever searched the office. Holmes knelt beside the body. "No, you disagree." "Sykes entered this room willingly." "How can you tell?" "No defensive injuries. His truncheon remains in its loop. His cap lies upon the table in the outer office rather than upon the floor. He removed it before coming in." He knew his killer, or believed he had no reason to fear him. Holmes examined the dead man's boots. The soles were dry except for a narrow line of pale dust around the edges. He scraped some onto a sheet of paper. "Plaster," I said, "and powdered brick. He had been somewhere under repair before he died." "He was a watchman," Lestrade said. "The entire building might provide that. The corridors are painted wood, and the cellar floor is stone. This dust is fresh and contains red pigment." Holmes folded the paper and placed it in his pocket. He turned his attention to the window. It was closed but not latched. "Second floor," Lestrade said. "No balcony and no drainpipe close enough to climb." Holmes opened it. Below us lay a narrow courtyard. The roofs of several adjoining buildings met at different heights. A determined man might have crossed them, though not without considerable risk. Upon the outer sill rested a small black smear. Holmes touched it with one finger. "Boot polish?" I asked. "Printer's ink." "The stationer below." "He sells paper. His printing is done elsewhere." Holmes leaned through the window and examined the brickwork. "The mark is recent. Someone crossed this sill after handling freshly printed material. Then the intruder escaped across the roofs," Lestrade said. "Someone used the window. Whether he entered or escaped by it remains to be seen." Holmes returned to the outer office. Despite the violence of the search, one section of the room had remained untouched. A narrow shelf above Ma's desk held a clock, an empty pipe rack and a framed certificate from the Metropolitan Police. Holmes lifted the certificate. Behind it was a small square of clean wallpaper. "Something else hung here," he said. "A photograph." I suggested. "Too small. Perhaps a calendar." Lestrade examined the floor. If it was removed, it could be anywhere among this mess. The intruder did not remove it. Holmes reached behind the desk and retrieved a wooden frame with broken glass. Inside, it was a railway timetable. He studied the back. 5 words had been written in pencil. "Look where I cannot see." Lestrade read them over his shoulder. "What does that mean?" Ma left an instruction. For himself. A man does not hide an instruction from himself behind a railway timetable. Then he left it for us. For whoever understood what he had been investigating. Holmes sat in Ma's chair. Before him stood the desk, its drawers emptied and its papers scattered. To his right was the door. To his left, the window. He looked slowly around the room. Where could Ma not see while working? I asked. Behind himself. Holmes rose and examined the chair. The leather back appeared ordinary. He pressed along its edge until a narrow section lifted beneath his thumb. Inside was a folded sheet of tracing paper. Lestrade leaned over his shoulder. It contained a list of dates, locations, and initials. The 4th of March, HB, £8,000. The 11th of March, CU, £12,000. The 19th of March, ML, £6,500. The 2nd of April, Nancy, £15,000. The 17th of April, Imperial, £9,000. Beside each entry appeared the same name. Banks, Lestrade said. Or lending houses, Holmes replied. At least £50,000. And the list may be incomplete. At the bottom, Ma had written, all securities examined and accepted. Same owner. Different hands. What does different hands mean? I asked. Different handwriting. More likely different men presenting the securities. Lestrade tapped the words same owner. Mercer. Perhaps. But the bonds came from his safe. The securities may not all have been bonds. Holmes held the page toward the lamp. Several entries had been erased. Faint indentations remained in the paper. He laid the sheet flat and passed the side of a pencil lightly across it. A final line appeared. AC witnessed every transfer. Lestrade looked up. Alistair Crowe. Holmes's expression did not change. You know him. Everyone in the city knows Crowe. Solicitor. Financial advisor. Represents half a dozen shipping firms and 2 banks. Impeccable reputation. Where are his offices? Lincoln's Inn Fields. Within walking distance of Ma's office. Lestrade took out his notebook. I'll send men immediately. To do what? Question him. About what? His initials are on Ma's list. Along with the initials of thousands of other Londoners. He witnessed every transfer. That is one interpretation. We require facts before we give Mr. Crowe an opportunity to prepare his answers. Lestrade put the notebook away with visible reluctance. Holmes searched Ma's papers systematically. Most concerned ordinary domestic inquiries, an unfaithful husband in Bayswater, a missing warehouse employee and a dispute over forged signatures. Nothing else referred to Vale. I examined the contents of the fireplace. The ashes were cold. Among them lay several fragments of thick cream-colored paper. The writing had burned away, but part of an embossed heading remained. Holmes crouched beside me. Legal stationery, I said. He lifted the largest fragment with his forceps. Only 3 letters had survived. CRO. Lestrade smiled without humor. Crowe. Or Croft, Crossley, Cromwell or Crown, Holmes said. How many coincidences do you require? Fewer than you imagine. More than you possess. Holmes turned the fragment over. A reddish thumbprint marked one corner. Blood? I asked. Wax? He raised it to his nose. Cedar oil and vermilion. An uncommon mixture. Sealing wax, Lestrade said. Used by a particular office, if we are fortunate. A constable appeared in the doorway. Inspector, there is a woman downstairs asking for Mr. Marr. Lestrade looked at Holmes. Bring her up. The woman who entered was perhaps 40, plainly dressed and carrying a small leather case. Her eyes moved at once across the disordered room. What has happened? Your name? Lestrade asked. Eleanor Marr. His wife. His sister. She gripped the case more tightly. Where is Julian? Lestrade told her. She closed her eyes, though she did not cry. I warned him. About Edmund Vale? Holmes asked. Her eyes opened. You know that name. We know that your brother was dressed as Edmund Vale when he died. She stared at him. That is not possible. Did you know he possessed such a disguise? No. When did you last see him? Yesterday afternoon. He came to my house. At what hour? 5. How did he appear? Agitated. He asked me to keep something for him. Chapter 13. The Tailor's Book. Miss Marr placed the leather case upon her brother's desk. I was to bring it here tomorrow if he had not returned. Lestrade reached for the clasps, but Holmes stopped him. Did your brother tell you what it contained? No. He said only that it concerned a man who had been assembled. Assembled. That was his word. Holmes opened the case. Inside lay a tailor's measuring book and a small black notebook bound with an elastic cord. Holmes examined the measuring book first. Each page carried a client's name followed by columns of figures: chest, waist, sleeve, inside leg and neck. 7 pages had been marked with red thread. Jonas Pike, Frederick Bell, Samuel Dorr, Henry Latham, Percival Ross, Matthew Crane, Thomas Wren. 7 men. The measurements differed considerably. One man was broad in the shoulder, another narrow in the waist. Their arms and legs varied in length. No 2 bodies were alike. Yet beneath every name, written in the same hand, appeared an additional instruction. Alter finished garment to veil pattern. Miss Marr stared at the words. A tailor made them appear alike. He altered the proportions of their clothing, I said. Padding in the shoulders, changes to the waist, differences in the length of the coat. Enough to reproduce the same outline, Holmes said. Not enough to withstand careful measurement. He turned several pages. Beside each set of measurements, the tailor had recorded small adjustments: a raised shoulder, a shortened sleeve, padding beneath one heel, a stiffened knee. The limp, I said. Holmes nodded. Built partly into the performance and partly into the clothes. The gloves at Bell Yard were altered as well, Lestrade said, to conceal differences in the hands. Mr. Gray did not require 7 identical men. He required 7 men who could be made identical at a distance. The final pages contained orders for dark coats, narrow-brimmed hats and waistcoats without makers' labels. 7 silver-headed canes had been supplied by a theatrical costumer in Lambeth. The last written page carried only one name. Mr. Gray. Beneath it appeared a list of requirements. No labels. No identifying stitches. 7 complete sets. Payment in cash. Delivery through separate carriers. No address. Lestrade asked. None, Holmes said. Then it tells us nothing we did not already know. It tells us that the tailor dealt directly with Gray and understood that the clothing was not intended for an ordinary theatrical production. Holmes closed the book. Who gave this to your brother? He asked. Mr. Nathaniel Wicks. The tailor. Yes. He came to Julian 4 days ago. He was frightened. What did he tell him? That he had made 7 sets of identical clothing for 7 different men. At first, he believed they were intended for the theatre. Then he discovered that the men were wearing them in banks, offices, and private houses. Where can we find him? Miss Marr's expression changed. You cannot. Why? He disappeared the following morning. Lestrade moved toward the door. His address. Wicks and Son, Chapel Street. Holmes remained beside the desk. Your brother knew he was in danger. Why did he agree to wear the disguise? He believed it was the only way to draw out the person directing the fraud. Did he name that person? No. He called him Gray. Did he know Gray's real identity? I do not think so. But he had discovered something. Miss Marr nodded. He said the fraud was already complete. The money no longer mattered. Holmes's gaze sharpened. What mattered? Edmund Vale had to die. A clock began striking midnight somewhere beyond the window. 1, 2, 3. Lestrade looked down at Marr's list of loans. £50,000 in credit and £40,000 in stolen bonds. Of course the money mattered. To the fraud, yes, Holmes replied. But the public death of Edmund Vale served another purpose. To prevent the banks from questioning him. More than that. A dead man cannot be required to explain where he obtained his securities. He cannot contradict witnesses, appear in court or reveal the men who created him. And Marr was killed because he discovered the scheme, I said. Marr was killed because he entered it wearing Vale's face. His murderer used the opportunity to silence an investigator and bury Edmund Vale in the same grave. Holmes picked up the black notebook. Most of its pages contained brief records of Marr's inquiries. Several referred to a bank that had employed him after receiving an application for a large loan in Vale's name. Near the end, Marr had written, Wicks confirms 7 suits. 7 wearers. Gray controlled instructions and payment. The next entry had been underlined twice. Pike wishes to withdraw. Sister threatened. Letters to Gray collected at 18, Montague Place. No evidence Gray resides there. Lestrade leaned closer. Montague Place. Pike wrote to Gray, I said. That must be where the letters were sent. Or collected, Holmes replied. Marr was careful to distinguish between the two. A folded sheet had been inserted between the final pages. It was a rough plan of Bell Yard. The rear alley, upper room and position of the 7 chairs had all been marked. Beside the upper room, Marr had written, Pike to provide disguise. Enter as Vale. Force Gray to make contact. Below it appeared a final line. If Gray learns of the substitution, he will attempt to kill Vale before the fraud is exposed. Miss Marr gripped the edge of the desk. Julian knew. He understood the danger, Holmes said. Then why did he go? Because he believed Gray would never reveal himself to Julian Marr. But he might reveal himself to Edmund Vale, I said. Holmes closed the notebook. He underestimated how completely Gray controlled the identity. Lestrade pointed toward the entry concerning Montague Place. We have an address. We have a place where Gray's correspondence was collected. That is enough to begin. Soon. Lestrade stared at him. Soon? A watchman is dead, Marr has been murdered and the tailor has disappeared. And if Gray knows that Marr discovered Montague Place, what do you expect to find there now? Evidence. Only what he wishes us to find. Holmes returned to the dead watchman. Sykes's coat had been searched, but one inner pocket had been cut open rather than turned out. Part of its lining hung loose. Holmes ran his fingers along the torn seam and removed a small piece of card. It was a theatre ticket. The Adelphi. On its reverse, written in pencil, was a single address. 23, Grafton Street. Jonas Pike's rooms, I said. Lestrade stared at it. Sykes knew Pike. Or had been sent to find him. By Ma. Ma was with Pike while Sykes was killed. Then Sykes surprised the intruder. Holmes shook his head. Sykes removed his cap in the outer office. His truncheon remained in its loop. He entered the sleeping chamber without alarm. He knew his killer. Or admitted him as part of his duties. Holmes moved to the broken door and examined the damaged lock. Sykes brought a visitor upstairs. The visitor carried Pike's address and wished to search Ma's office. Once Sykes had served his purpose, he was struck from behind. Why break the door? I asked. To make the crime appear to have begun with a forced entry. The splinters upon the landing show that it was broken outward before the killer escaped across the roofs. Lestrade looked around the ruined office. Then the killer knew Ma was meeting Pike. Yes. He knew Pike had helped Ma become Vale. Either he knew before the meeting or discovered it soon afterward. And he searched this room for Ma's evidence. Holmes glanced at the leather case. Evidence which Ma had already placed beyond his reach. Crow? Lestrade asked. Perhaps. Lestrade released an impatient breath. We have found Crow's initials, part of his name upon burned stationery and evidence that he witnessed every fraudulent transfer. We have found the initials AC, 3 surviving letters and a solicitor whose profession would naturally place him near financial documents. How many coincidences do you require? Fewer than you imagine. More than you possess. What more do you need? A reason why a respected solicitor would personally climb across rooftops and murder a watchman when he could pay another man to do both. Holmes walked to the window. The person who searched this office was desperate. He overturned the cabinets, cut open the chairs and burned correspondence. Yet he failed to find the tracing paper hidden inside Ma's chair. Because he did not understand Ma's message, I said. Look where I cannot see. No. Because he never saw the message. Holmes pointed toward the gas lamp upon Ma's desk. Its glass chimney was clean, but the wick had not been lit. The killer could not risk showing a light through the window. He searched this room almost entirely by touch. What of the candle in the sleeping chamber? Lestrade asked. Unused. The wick is unburned. Holmes looked toward the outer sill. He crossed the roofs in darkness, after searching an unfamiliar office without light. That suggests agility, desperation, and considerable confidence. Enough to identify him? Lestrade asked. Not yet. Holmes placed Ma's notebook inside his coat. But we now know where Gray's letters were collected. Number 18, Montague Place, I said. Holmes nodded. And Crow? Mr. Crow can wait. We have more evidence against him than against Gray. Which makes him either our criminal or the man our criminal wishes us to investigate. Holmes opened the door. Gray, on the other hand, created Edmund Vale, controlled the actors and arranged the payments. Someone at Montague Place received his correspondence. We left the dead watchman beneath the cold gaslight. As we descended the stairs, I glanced back at the ruined office. Ma had hidden his evidence where he could not see it while working. Sykes had died carrying the address of a man he should not have known. 7 actors had created one life, and an 8th man had been murdered to end it. Yet one question troubled me above all others. Holmes had voiced it before we left Bell Yard. If Edmund Vale was already dead, who had escaped through the window? Chapter 14. The Man Behind the Screen. Number 18. Montague Place was a respectable house whose polished brass and white curtains suggested nothing more criminal than an excessive concern for appearances. The landlady answered the door in a nightcap and dressing gown. Her annoyance disappeared when Lestrade identified himself. Yes, there was a Mr. Gray, she said. Though whether that was his name, I could not say. Describe him, Holmes said. Tall. Well-spoken. Always wore a dark coat. He kept his hat on indoors and wrapped a scarf around the lower part of his face. Did he live here? No. He rented the upstairs parlor and came only by appointment. What sort of visitors did he receive? Gentlemen, mostly. Younger men. One or two looked like actors. Holmes showed her Jonas Pike's name. She considered it. I could not swear to it. Did Mr. Gray receive correspondence? Frequently. The letters were addressed only to his name. He collected every one himself. When did you last see him? A week ago. He paid what he owed and returned the key. Did he remove anything from the room? Nothing that I saw. He never kept much there. She led us upstairs. The room contained a desk, 2 chairs, and a folding screen positioned near the fireplace. It was otherwise bare. Pike had said that Gray interviewed him from behind such a screen. Holmes examined the carpet. The furniture had left deep impressions in the pile. A second set of marks showed that the desk had previously stood closer to the window. Why move it? Lestrade asked. To alter what a visitor could see. Holmes sat in the chair Pike would have occupied. From that position, the screen concealed the fireplace and half the room. A man seated behind it could observe his visitor through a narrow gap without being clearly seen himself. Holmes changed places and crouched behind the screen. A small shelf had been fixed to the wall. Upon it rested the mouthpiece of a speaking tube. The tube disappeared through the floor. A voice changer. I asked. Something simpler. Holmes spoke into it. His words emerged from a brass grill behind the visitor's chair. The tube muffled his voice and made its direction difficult to determine. Lestrade looked toward the empty space behind the screen. Mr. Gray could have been a woman. Or one of the other men recruited to play Vale, Holmes replied. The arrangement concealed more than a face. He removed the grill and examined the interior of the tube. A pale residue clung to the metal. Chalk, I said. Face powder. Then Gray disguised himself. Or herself. We cannot yet say. Holmes examined the shelf. Beside the mouthpiece lay several drops of red sealing wax, as though letters had been sealed there. He scraped one with his nail and smelled it. Cedar oil and vermilion, I said. The same mixture found upon the burned legal paper in Mar's office. Lestrade smiled. Now will you visit Crow? Soon. Holmes. Mr. Gray vacated this room a week ago. Mar had already begun asking questions. If Crow is Gray, he knows that the operation has been discovered. Which is precisely why we should arrest him. On what charge? Fraud. Conspiracy. Murder. Possibly. Possibly is not a charge. And if he leaves London while we debate the matter? He will not. How can you know? Because Edmund Vale is dead, but the money is not yet safe. Holmes crossed to the window. The sash had been recently cleaned. Upon the sill remained the faint impression of an oval stamp surrounding 3 letters. NWS. Holmes took the tailor's measuring book from his coat and examined the inside cover. The same mark appeared there. Nathaniel Wicks and Son, I said. A package bearing the tailor's stamp rested upon this sill, Holmes replied. The clothing passed through this room. And Wicks disappeared 4 days ago. After giving his book to Mar. Holmes examined the frame of the window. A short fibre had caught beneath the latch. He removed it with his forceps. Black wool, Lestrade said. Perhaps. From one of Vale's coats. Or from any one of several thousand black coats in London. Lestrade gave him a weary look. Do you ever permit a clue to mean what it appears to mean? When appearances and facts agree. The constables began their search. One opened the desk drawers while the other examined the fireplace. They found only a broken pen, several unused envelopes and a small quantity of ash. Holmes knelt beside the grate. The ash was pale and fine. Among it lay several fragments of blackened paper. He lifted one onto the hearth. A line of printed text remained. Appearance Thursday. Another fragment carried part of a name. Bell. Frederick Bell, I said. One of the 7 men in Wicks's book. Lestrade searched through the remaining ash. Gray burned the actor's instructions before leaving. Some of them. You think he kept others? I think he destroyed what he no longer required. Holmes examined the unused envelopes on the desk. They were cheap and unremarkable, but one bore a faint indentation where another sheet had been written upon it. He shaded the surface lightly with his pencil. Several broken words appeared. Wicks knows. Book missing. Ma. The remainder was illegible. Lestrade leaned over him. Gray knew Wicks had spoken to Ma. Yes. Then Gray had both men killed. Wicks is missing. We do not yet know that he is dead. You cannot seriously believe he is alive. I prefer not to murder a man merely because his absence would make the case more convenient. Holmes placed the envelope inside his notebook. A constable called from behind the screen. Inspector. A narrow section of skirting board had come loose beneath the shelf. Behind it was a shallow compartment. It contained 7 small cards. Each bore one of the names from Wicks's book. On the reverse of every card was a different address and a number between 1 and 7. Holmes arranged them upon the desk. Jonas Pike's card bore the number 2 and the address of his rooms in Grafton Street. Frederick Bell's card bore the number 4. Samuel Dawes bore 6. Henry Latham's bore 1. Percival Ross's bore 5. Matthew Crane's bore 3. Thomas Wren's bore 7. The actors, Lestrade said. Their real addresses. And their assigned numbers. Now we can arrest all 7. For what crime? They impersonated Vale. Pike believed he was performing a private commission. The others may have been deceived as completely as he was. Or they may be packing their bags while we stand here discussing their innocence. Holmes gathered the cards. Then we should not give them time to finish. Lestrade moved toward the door. Which one first? Holmes consulted the tailor's book. Frederick Bell. Why Bell? Because Gray burned part of his name but concealed the card that would allow him to be found. That proves nothing. It proves that Gray wished to erase Bell from one record while preserving him in another. For what purpose? That is what Mr. Bell will tell us. And if he refuses? Holmes put on his gloves. Then perhaps his clothes will speak for him. He moved toward the stairs, then stopped. Inspector, send a man to each of the other addresses. They are not to make arrests. They are merely to observe and report. Lestrade issued the orders. Outside, the fog had begun to thin. The first grey suggestion of morning lay above the roofs, though the streets remained almost deserted. Holmes stood beneath the lamp and opened Wicks's measuring book once more. We have 7 names, he said. 7 addresses and 7 numbers. He closed the book. It is time we met Edmund Vale. Chapter 15. 7 men. 1 life. The following morning, we found Frederick Bell in a narrow boarding house near Clerkenwell. He was 36, thin, pale and so ordinary in appearance that I might have passed him a dozen times without remembering his face. When Holmes showed him the false beard, Bell's resistance collapsed. For 6 months, he had worked at Mercer & Company under the name Edmund Vale. He claimed that a private agency had placed him there to investigate irregularities in Mercer's accounts. The news of Vale's murder bewildered him for the simplest of reasons. Bell believed that he himself was Edmund Vale. You knew the name was false, Lestrade said. I knew it was the name I was to use. That is generally what false means. Bell looked helplessly toward Holmes. I was told that Mercer suspected his employees. If I entered under my own name, the inquiry might be discovered. What were your instructions? Holmes asked. To keep the accounts and copy any records connected with irregular transfers. And the bonds? Bell's face tightened. I was told they were evidence. You removed them from Mercer's safe. Only those listed in the instructions. How did you open it? I made an impression of the key and deposited the bonds at Victoria Station, under numbered receipts. I never knew who collected them. Even Bell's behavior at the office had been prescribed. The cheap black cigarettes, the nervous manner, the high voice and the habitual clearing of his throat had all formed part of the performance. Why the clearing of the throat? I asked. To remind the witnesses, Holmes replied. Bell stared at him. Remember what? That this version of Vale possessed a high, uncertain voice. Mr. Gray did not merely teach these men how to play Vale. He taught everyone around them how Vale should be remembered. Lestrade placed Bell under arrest. As the constables led him away, Holmes marked his name in Wicks's book. Samuel Dorr was found at a shipping office beside the Thames. He was a former sailor with a broken nose and hands hardened by rope. Twice each week, he became Edmund Vale and negotiated the movement of cargo that did not exist. He had been told that the transactions were part of an inquiry into insurance fraud. Henry Latham was a failed schoolmaster. As Vale, he visited banks and lending institutions. He believed he was testing weaknesses in their lending procedures. Percival Ross was an auctioneer's assistant. He purchased paintings and silver in Vale's name, creating a visible history of wealth. He had been told that the purchases concealed the identity of a foreign collector. Matthew Crane, a former cavalry officer, was the Edmund Vale known at the Albion Club. The scar upon his right wrist was genuine. He supplied the stories of India, though Gray had forbidden him to name a regiment or describe any place in detail. Each man had been recruited separately. Each performed only a narrow part of Vale's life. Each had met Mr. Gray behind a screen. None had seen his face. By evening, 6 of the 7 names in Wicks's measuring book had been accounted for, including Jonas Pike. Only Thomas Wren remained. His address led us to a lodging house near Waterloo. The door to his room stood open. Inside, the bed had not been slept in. A cold cup of tea rested upon the table. The wardrobe was empty, and several bare hooks showed where clothing had recently been removed. A railway guide lay open to the departures for Dover. Lestrade searched the drawers. He has run. Holmes examined the grate. Recently. A fire had burned there within the last few hours. Most of its contents had been reduced to ash, but Holmes recovered the corner of an envelope. Part of the red seal had survived. Cedar oil and vermilion, I said. The same wax used at Montague Place, Holmes replied. Lestrade lifted a half-burned sheet from the edge of the grate. Only 3 fragments remained legible. Final appearance. All remaining articles to Bell Yard. Payment upon confirmation of death. Whose death? I asked. Edmund Vale's, Lestrade said. Holmes examined the room. There were no signs of violence. Wren had packed carefully and destroyed his instructions before leaving. He may be the man who escaped Bell Yard, Lestrade continued. He may. You sound unconvinced. We were shown a man wearing Vale's disguise. We were not shown Thomas Wren. Who else would have been there? Someone with access to Bell Yard and the costumes. Lestrade pointed toward the railway guide. Wren has gone to Dover. Holmes studied the marked timetable. A train had departed 40 minutes earlier. He wishes us to believe so. He removed his belongings and marked the departure. Exactly. You think he left it deliberately? Thomas Wren has spent 6 months helping to create a convincing appearance. We should hesitate before trusting the first one he offers us. Lestrade sent a telegram to Dover nonetheless. Holmes went to the washstand. The basin contained grey water. A towel beside it bore traces of dark dye. On the floor lay several small pieces of adhesive and 2 hairs from a false beard. Wren removed Vale before leaving, I said. Holmes examined the pillow and found several short brown hairs. His natural colour, he said. You cannot find a man in London by brown hair, Lestrade replied. No, but we can discover which part of Vale's life belonged to him. Holmes opened Wicks's measuring book at Wren's page. Unlike the entries for the other 6 men, Wren's contained no instructions for a limp, altered shoulder or disguised hands. His measurements corresponded almost exactly to the dimensions of the finished Vale garments. Attached to the page was a narrow label. Reserve fitting. No regular appearances. He had no employer, fiancé, club or business appointments, I said. He remained outside Vale's ordinary life, Holmes replied. Why create an actor who never performed? Lestrade asked. Holmes looked at the surviving lines from the fire. He was reserved for the end. The final appearance, I said. Holmes nodded. When the fraud was complete, Edmund Vale needed to appear once more before witnesses. Wren could do so without being recognized as any particular version of Vale. And then disappear, Lestrade said. Most likely. He may have been promised payment and passage abroad once Vale's death had been confirmed. Lestrade looked again at the half-burned instruction. Then Wren was supposed to die outside the Langham. Not necessarily. Gray required Vale to die. Whether Wren understood what that meant is another matter. But Marr died in his place. Marr was not a random substitute. He borrowed the disguise from Pike and attempted to make contact with the people behind the scheme. Gray discovered what he had done. How? That remains unanswered. Holmes picked up the fragment containing the words final appearance. But once Gray knew that Marr had become Vale, he no longer needed Wren at the Langham. Marr provided both the appearance and the corpse. He silenced the investigator and completed the fraud with the same bullet, I said. Precisely. And Wren received confirmation that Vale was dead, collected his payment and disappeared. Lestrade walked to the window. Then the man at Bell Yard may have been Wren destroying what remained. Or someone sent to ensure that the actors could not explain the substitution. The gas would have killed Pike. Yes. Pike could identify Marr as the man beneath Vale's beard. Without Pike, the corpse would remain Edmund Vale. Holmes examined the theatre ticket found inside Sykes's coat. Sykes carried Pike's address. The killer who searched Marr's office knew that Marr had met Pike. Someone watched one of them, intercepted a message or obtained the information from a third party. You no longer believe Pike told Gray. I have no evidence that he did. He concealed the 7 actors for 6 weeks. Because his sister had been threatened. He also helped Marr assume the disguise. Because he wished to expose Gray. You believe him. I believe fear and courage may occupy the same man. Neither proves honesty. A faint sound came from the passage. Holmes raised one hand. A shadow moved beneath the door. Lestrade pulled it open. The landing was empty. Holmes reached the stairs before us. We heard the front door close below, followed by hurried footsteps upon the pavement. By the time we reached the street, no one was visible. A folded note lay upon the doorstep. Holmes opened it. The message had been typed. Mr. Holmes, you are searching for a man who has already died. If you continue, the woman will die in his place. Miss Whitcomb, I said. Lestrade called for the constable stationed at the corner and ordered 2 men to Clara's house. Holmes examined the paper. No watermark. Common stock. The message could have been typed in any office in London. He turned it over. Faint raised lines marked the reverse where another sheet had been typed upon the one beneath it. Holmes held the page sideways beneath the lamp. 3 words slowly became visible. Crowe and Bellingham, solicitors. Lestrade gave a grim smile. Still not enough. It is enough to make me suspicious. Of Crowe. Of the person who delivered this. Lestrade stared at him. The note came from Crowe's office. The impression came from a sheet once placed beneath Crowe's stationery. That is not the same thing. We found Crowe's initials in Marr's records. His stationery was burned in Marr's fireplace. His sealing wax was used at Montague Place. Now his firm's name appears upon a threat. Yes. And you still call that coincidence? No. I call it insistence. Holmes folded the note. Someone has taken considerable pains to ensure that every road leads us to Alistair Crowe. Because Crowe is guilty. Perhaps. Or because Gray wishes us to reach him before we discover who Gray is. Lestrade looked toward Wren's darkened window. What does the first sentence mean? You are searching for a man who has already died. On its surface, Edmund Vale. And beneath it. Holmes glanced at the list of 7 names in Wicks's book. Possibly Thomas Wren. You think Wren is dead? I think someone wishes us to stop searching for him. Holmes placed the threat in his pocket. We shall return to Baker Street. Crowe's offices are closer. Which is precisely why we shall not go there yet. Lestrade's patience finally broke. A woman has been threatened, Wren has escaped, and every piece of evidence names Crowe. What do you expect to find at Baker Street? The one thing our enemy cannot plant. And what is that? The order in which the facts occurred. We left Waterloo as darkness settled across the city. In the cab, Holmes said nothing. He sat with his chin upon his chest and Wicks's measuring book open across his knees. 7 actors had constructed one life. 6 had supplied Vale with work, love, wealth, reputation and history. The 7th had waited in reserve to provide him with an ending. But Julian Marr had stepped into that final role, and someone had known soon enough to arrange his death. Holmes closed the book. Wren was not the man who died before the Langham, I said. No. Then where is he? That is not yet the most important question. What is? Holmes looked through the cab window at the lamps passing in the darkness. Who told Gray that Marr had become Vale? Chapter 16. Alistair Crowe. Holmes did not explain why he wished to return to Baker Street. Once there, he placed the threatening note beside Wicks's measuring book and opened Marr's black notebook. The order in which the facts occurred, I said. Precisely. He wrote 5 names upon a sheet of paper. Wicks, Marr, Pike, Wren, Crowe. Wicks discovered the purpose of the clothing and approached Marr, Holmes said. Marr was already investigating Vale for a bank. Pike then sought Marr's help independently. And Pike dressed him as Vale. After which Gray learned of the substitution, summoned Marr to the Langham and killed him. The question we ended with. Who told Gray that Marr had become Vale? Holmes opened Marr's notebook at the entries concerning the fraudulent loans. Beside every transaction appeared the initials AC. Alistair Crowe, I said. Solicitor to Edmund Vale. You believe Marr contacted him? A private detective investigating fraudulent securities would eventually question the solicitor who witnessed their transfer. Holmes lifted the threatening note. This was typed upon paper that had rested against the letterhead of Crowe and Bellingham. The wax found at Montague Place matches wax used upon correspondence from that office. Either Crowe is Mr. Gray, or someone with access to his firm wishes us to believe that he is. And Thomas Wren. Holmes turned to the tailor's measurements. Wren was the only actor without regular appearances. He was reserved for Vale's ending. If he also worked inside Crowe's office, he would possess access to the transactions, correspondence, and typewriter. You think Wren is one of Crowe's clerks? I think it is time we allowed Mr. Crowe to assist us. Alistair Crowe received us at 10 the following morning. His offices overlooked the gardens of Lincoln's Inn Fields. Dark wood covered the walls, and rows of leather-bound legal volumes stood behind glass. Nothing was out of place. Even the fire appeared to burn with professional restraint. Crowe was a tall, spare man of approximately 50. His iron-grey hair was cut close, and his face possessed the narrow, disciplined severity of a clergyman. He wore neither beard nor moustache. As we entered, he rose from behind his desk. Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Dr. Watson. Inspector Lestrade. You expected us? Lestrade asked. I expected the police. Mr. Holmes is an additional expense, though not entirely a surprise. His voice was slow, educated and carefully controlled. Mr. Gray's voice, according to Pike. Holmes removed his gloves. You represented a man named Edmund Vale. Crowe indicated the chairs. I represented Vale and Mercer in several financial transactions. There is no Vale and Mercer. So I have since been informed. You witnessed securities presented by Edmund Vale to 5 lending institutions. I witnessed signatures. The institutions examined the securities. Did you know those securities had been stolen? No. Did you know that Edmund Vale was being played by several men? Crowe did not answer immediately. That is an extraordinary suggestion. It was not a suggestion. Crowe rested his hands upon the desk. I observed that Mr. Vale's appearance altered slightly between meetings. Slightly. His beard. His manner of speaking. Once he wore tinted spectacles, upon another occasion clear. And you raised no objection. My clients are entitled to their eccentricities. Even when the client is physically a different man. I never observed sufficient difference to reach that conclusion. Holmes placed the Vale instructions upon the desk. For the first time, Crowe's composure shifted, only slightly. His right thumb moved across the edge of his left cuff. You recognize these? Holmes asked. No. They were hidden behind a mirror at Victoria Station. Then I cannot imagine how I would recognize them. They describe the different versions of Edmund Vale. Crowe read the first page without touching it. Remarkable. You are not easily astonished. A useful quality in a solicitor. Holmes placed Ma's list beside the instructions. Your initials appear beside every fraudulent loan. I was present at each signing. Why? Mr. Vale retained my firm to prepare the agreements. Who introduced him to you? Crowe looked toward the window. Mr. Henry Cartwright. Colonel Beaumont had named Cartwright as the man who proposed Vale for membership at the Albion Club. Where can we find him? Lestrade asked. I do not know. You accepted a client introduced by a man whose address you did not possess. He gave an address in Kensington. And it proved false. When did you discover that? This morning. Holmes smiled faintly. You sent someone to investigate after learning of Vale's death. I considered it prudent. Whom did you send? My chief clerk. His name? Edward Haldane. Is he here? No. Where is he? He has not reported for work. Describe him. 35. Brown hair. Medium height. Clean shaven. Does he wear spectacles? For reading. Does he limp? No. How long has he worked for you? 8 years. And before that? Crowe hesitated. He came with excellent references from a firm in Bristol. You verified them. My former partner did. Is that partner available? He died 5 years ago. How convenient. For Mr. Haldane, perhaps. Where does Haldane live? Lestrade asked. Grafton Crescent. He does not, Holmes said. The address in your employment records was examined this morning. Crowe sat back. Then it appears Mr. Haldane has deceived me as well. Or you provided him with a false history, Lestrade said. For what conceivable purpose? That is what we intend to discover. You expect us to believe, Lestrade said, that your chief clerk created a fictitious client, stole £40,000 in bonds, obtained another £50,000 in loans and conducted every agreement through your office without your knowledge. I expect nothing, Inspector. I state only what I know. Holmes walked toward a small side table. Upon it stood a red Remington typewriter. He inserted a clean sheet beneath the roller and typed a short sentence. He then placed it beside the threat delivered at Wren's lodging. In both samples, the letter E sat slightly above the line. The lower curve of each S was broken. Lestrade looked at Crowe. This threat was typed upon your machine. Crowe read it. His face remained still. When was it delivered? Last night. Then it may have been typed at any time before that. Who has access to this machine? Myself, my secretary and Mr. Haldane. Who possesses a key to the office? My partners, Mr. Haldane and myself. Where were you last night? At dinner with Lord Pemberton and 6 other gentlemen. I left my club at 11:30 and went directly home. Haldane. I do not know. The note threatened Miss Clara Whitcomb. Crow's gaze moved to Holmes. I have never heard that name. Holmes watched him for several seconds. You employed Jonas Pike to court her as Edmund Vale. No. You met him behind a screen at Montague Place. No. You used a speaking tube to conceal your voice. No. You ordered Nathaniel Wicks to produce 7 identical sets of clothing. No. Wicks disappeared after giving his records to Julian Marr. I know no one by that name. Holmes lifted the fragment recovered from Marr's fireplace. It bore part of Crow's letterhead and the remains of the distinctive red seal. Your correspondence was burned in Marr's office. Crow examined it. Half the papers leaving this firm bear that seal. Did you correspond with Marr? I did. At last. Crow opened a drawer and removed a file. Mr. Marr was retained by one of the lending institutions to confirm Vale's background. After he contacted me 3 weeks ago, I retained him to make further inquiries on behalf of my firm and provided copies of the transaction records. Why were those copies burned? I did not burn them. Someone did. Then you should question that person. He murdered the night watchman. Crow's expression remained unchanged. Holmes opened the file. The letters traced Marr's investigation from routine questions about Vale securities to growing doubts concerning his identity. The final letter had arrived 2 days before Marr's death. Mr. Crow, I have established that Edmund Vale is not one man. 7 persons have been employed to maintain separate portions of his life. One of them, Jonas Pike of the Adelphi Theatre, has agreed to demonstrate the method by which the disguise is assumed. I shall meet him privately tomorrow evening. If my conclusions are confirmed, I will place the matter before the authorities. Julian Marr. Holmes read the letter twice. Let me understand this, I said. A bank retained Marr. You then retained him for the same inquiry, while Pike and Wicks also sought his assistance. Was every man in London employing the same detective? Marr's name was given to me by the bank, Crow said. He possessed an excellent reputation in matters of financial fraud. Lestrade nodded. Marr's name was given to me by the bank, Crow said. And Pike and Wicks? I asked. Marr had a considerable reputation in cases involving false identities and financial fraud, Lestrade said. There are not many men in London trusted with such work. Holmes folded Marr's letter. Precisely. 4 paths, Watson, but only one investigation. This arrived. Mr. Haldane brought it to me. Did he read it? He opened my correspondence as part of his duties. What did you do? I instructed him to prepare the Vale files. And afterward? He left the office shortly after 6, and once Marr left
Holmes
dressed as
closed
Vale,
the file.
I said.
There was
Haldane knew that the
silence.
wrong man had taken
Haldane
Wren's
knew.
place, I said. The right
Yes,
man for Haldane's
Holmes
purpose,
replied.
Holmes said.
Before Marr met
an
Pike,
investigator could
Haldane
be
knew
silenced
their names,
while Edmund
the
Vale
purpose of the
acquired an
meeting, and the
identifiable
theatre
through which
corpse.
Pike could be traced.
Lestrade faced
Crow looked at the letter.
You concealed
Then
this letter
Haldane
from
may
us.
have followed Marr. I produced it
Or
when
watched
asked.
Pike.
Either would
After
have
your
led him
clerk
to Bell
disappeared.
Yard. I had no reason to suspect Haldane before this morning. Holmes returned to the typewriter. Haldane had access to Marr's letter, your stationery, your seal, this machine, and every Vale transaction. So it appears. Convenient. For neither of us. You know more than you are telling us. Crow met his gaze. Of course I do. I am a solicitor. Lestrade's patience ended. I am taking you to Scotland Yard. On what charge? Conspiracy to commit fraud. Your evidence establishes only that my firm acted for a fraudulent client. If that were a crime, Inspector, half the solicitors in London would be behind bars. Your chief clerk had access to everything, Lestrade said, which suggests that you should find him. Lestrade's face reddened, but Holmes placed a hand upon his arm. Mr. Crowe is correct. Crowe allowed himself the smallest smile. For the moment, Holmes added. The smile vanished. Holmes gathered the papers but left the first Vale instruction upon the desk. One final matter, he said. Cartwright introduced Vale to your firm. Yes. What did he look like? Tall. Dark beard. About 40. Glasses. No. Blue lenses. Crowe answered without hesitation. Vale wore the blue lenses only at the club. The room became still. Holmes had never mentioned the Albion Club. Crowe's eyes dropped briefly toward the instruction sheet. It described Mercer and Company, not the club. Holmes folded it and returned it to his pocket. How did you know that? He asked. Crowe recovered quickly. Vale may have mentioned his club. Which club? I do not recall. The Albion. If you say so. I did not. Crowe's hands remained upon the desk, but his fingers had tightened. Holmes stepped closer. Your legal records concern loans and securities. They contain no reference to the Albion Club, blue lenses, or the version of Vale who appeared there after 9. Yet you knew that those spectacles belonged only to that role. A deduction from your question. No. A correction supplied from knowledge. Crowe rose. This interview is concluded. Holmes put on his gloves. Yes. We are leaving. Lestrade asked. We have what we require. Outside, Lestrade turned upon him. You allowed him to remain free after that. He knows the 7 roles. Then arrest him. For possessing information. For directing the fraud. We have proved that he concealed knowledge. We have not yet proved whether he created Vale or discovered the truth through Haldane. You believe his explanation? No. Then why leave? Holmes looked back at Crowe's windows. Because Crowe is watching Haldane, and Haldane is watching Crowe. And whichever man believes the other intends to betray him will move first. We have found the man who learned of Mar's plan, I said. We have found the clerk who possessed access to Crowe's correspondence, seal and typewriter. You think Haldane was Mr. Gray? I think he was one of the men who used that name. Holmes looked back at Crowe's windows. At present, Watson, I should be astonished if anything about Edward Haldane were true. Chapter 17. The Missing Clerk. We have an alibi and a missing clerk. Exactly. Outside Crowe's offices, Lestrade turned upon Holmes. You said Crowe was correct. He was. Then why do you appear satisfied? Because an innocent solicitor, upon discovering that his chief clerk had used his office to steal £90,000, would be angry, frightened, or astonished. Crowe is a cold man. He is a prepared man. You believe he created Vale. With Haldane's assistance. But Crowe could not have shot Mar. 20 witnesses place him in the Court of Chancery. Which makes Haldane the more likely gunman. The same Haldane who murdered Sykes and escaped from Bell Yard. The evidence points toward him. Then what remains? His reason for threatening Miss Whitcomb. To silence Pike. Pike is in police custody. Miss Whitcomb knows nothing that could convict either man. She can identify Pike. She can identify the man who courted her as Vale. That is not the same thing. Holmes stopped and looked up at Crowe's windows. 7 men were used because no single participant could expose the entire design. Haldane was different. He had access to Crowe's office, stationery, seal and typewriter. He knew of Mar's inquiry. If he was Gray, he also recruited the actors, arranged their appearances and controlled the disguises. Then Haldane can expose Crow, I said. Yes. And Crow can expose Haldane. Yes. I began to understand. They no longer need one another. They can no longer afford one another, Holmes replied. We spent the remainder of the day searching for Edward Haldane. The address recorded in Crow's files proved false. No cabman admitted carrying a passenger of his description. His photograph had disappeared from the firm's staff records, and none of the clerks knew where he had been born or whether he possessed family in London. Like Edmund Vale, Haldane had left evidence of a life but very little life behind it. Shortly before 11:30 that night, we returned to Lincoln's Inn Fields. 2 constables had kept Crow's office under observation throughout the evening. No one has entered or left, one reported. Crow? Lestrade asked. Still inside, sir. Holmes looked toward the upper windows. A light burned behind the curtains. He knows we are watching, Lestrade said. Of course. And remains at his desk, where an innocent man would continue his work and a guilty man would make certain he could be seen doing so. A cab turned into the square. It approached rapidly before stopping beside us. The driver twisted around upon his seat. Inspector Lestrade. Lestrade stepped forward. The cab door opened. Clara Whitcomb sat inside. Her wrists were bound, and a strip of cloth covered her mouth. A bruise darkened her temple. For one terrible instant, I thought she was dead. Then she moved. Lestrade tore open the door while I climbed inside. Clara was conscious but dazed. There was no other passenger. Where did you collect her? Holmes asked the driver. King's Cross. Who placed her in the cab? A gentleman with brown hair. No beard. Reading spectacles. Did he give you this address? Yes, sir. Crow and Bellingham, Lincoln's Inn Fields. Said Inspector Lestrade would be waiting outside. Lestrade stared at Holmes. He knew we were here. He knew Crow's office would be watched. I removed the cloth from Clara's mouth and cut the cord around her wrists. He took Jonah's, she whispered. Pike? I asked. She nodded. From police custody. Lestrade demanded. A constable brought him to my house. Lestrade turned toward the 2 policemen. Find out who authorized Pike's removal. Holmes remained beside the cab. What reason did the constable give, Miss Whitcomb? He said Jonah's was required for an identification. Inspector Lestrade had ordered him to show me the man who had employed him. I issued no such order, Lestrade said. The uniform may have been genuine, Holmes replied. The constable was not. Clara gripped my sleeve. Jonah's tried to warn me. The policeman struck him. Was the policeman Haldane? Holmes asked. I do not know. He had brown hair and spectacles. He looked ordinary. A useful appearance. What happened then? He forced Jonah's to tell me about a luggage box at Victoria Station. Forced him how? He held a pistol against him and said I would be killed if Jonah's refused. Holmes's expression hardened. What did Pike say? That Ma believed the original papers were kept there. The actors' real names, the accounts and records of the payments. Had Pike seen those papers? No. Ma told him that they existed. Then Ma intended Pike to repeat the story if anything happened to him, Holmes said. Which box? 317. The brass key found inside Vale's desk. Lestrade understood at once. Haldane needs the key. No, Holmes said. He needs us to bring it. Whether it opens the box is precisely what he intends to discover. Then why was it left in Vale's desk? I asked. To connect Vale with Victoria Station. Whether Haldane placed it there remains uncertain. Clara looked at him. Jonas said the box had to be opened before midnight. Why? The man told him that if it remained locked at midnight, Jonas would die and the papers would be removed. Where is Pike now? I asked. He took him away. I heard something about Victoria. Holmes checked his watch. 11:30. The station is 20 minutes away, Lestrade said. And Haldane has left us 10 minutes to decide, Holmes replied. Lestrade looked toward Crow's illuminated windows. He wants us away from here. Possibly. Then this is a diversion. It is more than that. He arranged for Miss Whitcomb to be delivered directly into our hands. He supplied the box number, the deadline, and the destination. He expects us to understand the invitation. To bring key 317, I said. Yes. Lestrade removed the brass key from his inner pocket. It remains police evidence. Holmes held out his hand. For the moment, it is bait. Lestrade handed him the key. And if we refuse? Pike dies. Lestrade called one of the constables. Send 6 men to Victoria. Cover every entrance. Holmes shook his head. If uniformed police arrive first, Haldane may kill Pike and disappear. You expect us to walk into his trap alone. I expect him to be prepared for the police. He may be less prepared for us. He knows you are coming. He knows we possess the key. That is why he selected us. Clara tried to rise from the cab. I'm going with you. No, Holmes said. He will kill Jonas. He may kill him if he sees you. She looked at Holmes. You cannot leave him there. I have no intention of doing so. Holmes climbed into the cab. Lestrade followed him, then turned toward me. Watson, take Miss Whitcomb somewhere safe. You may need a doctor. I shall need one here if her injury is more serious than it appears, Holmes said. Clara seized my arm before I could answer. Go with them. You have been struck upon the head. And Jonas has a pistol against his. I looked toward Holmes. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he moved farther along the seat. Bring her inside Crow's office, he said. 2 constables will remain with her. Watson comes with us. Lestrade gave the orders. As I helped Clara toward the building, Holmes examined the cab floor. Near the opposite door lay a small scrap of dark cloth. He lifted it between 2 fingers. From Haldane's coat. I asked. Perhaps. Upon the cloth was a faint reddish smear. Wax. Holmes smelled it. Cedar oil and vermilion. Lestrade looked up at Crow's windows. His office again. Or another object intended to make us look at it. You still doubt Crow? I doubt evidence that announces its conclusion before it has been examined. The clock at the end of the square showed 25 minutes to midnight. Clara stopped before entering the building. Mr. Holmes. He looked at her. What will you do? Give Haldane what he believes he requires. The key. The appearance of cooperation. And Jonas. I shall bring him back if he is still at Victoria. If. Holmes did not soften the word. Haldane has constructed this evening as carefully as he constructed Edmund Vale. The cab, the address, and the deadline are parts of a performance. Then why go? Because every successful performance requires something real at its center. Holmes stepped into the cab. Lestrade and I joined him. The driver raised his whip. Victoria Station, Holmes ordered. As quickly as you can. As the cab moved away, I looked back. Clara stood between the 2 constables beneath the polished brass plate of Crow and Bellingham. Above her, Crow remained visible as a dark figure behind the illuminated curtain. He is sending us away from Crow, I said. Perhaps. To destroy the papers. Perhaps. To kill Pike. Almost certainly, if we fail to follow. Then what is at Victoria? Holmes drew the brass key from his pocket. The oval disc caught the passing light. 317. A box Haldane cannot open, he said. And inside it. We shall discover whether Pike told the truth. The cab turned toward the Strand. Behind us, The clock showed 20 minutes to midnight. "Where are we going?" Lestrade asked. Holmes closed his fingers around the key. "To attend the funeral of Edmund Vale." Chapter 18. The Empty Luggage Box. We reached Victoria Station with 3 minutes remaining. The great concourse had changed since our earlier visit. Most of the shops were shuttered. The evening crowds had thinned, and the empty spaces beneath the iron roof seemed larger beneath the reduced gaslight. 4 plainclothes officers were waiting near the first-class waiting room. The attendant from the left luggage office stood nervously at the end of the passage. "You sent for assistance," I said. "Lestrade did," Holmes replied. "Haldane expects us, but he cannot know precisely how we shall arrive." "What is the plan?" "Box 317 remains unopened." "You found it?" Holmes pointed toward a row of iron-fronted compartments behind the left luggage counter. "Deposited 4 months ago under the name Edmund Vale. The fees were paid in advance." "Do we know what it contains?" "No." "Then why not open it?" "Because Haldane expects us to open it for him." Lestrade checked his watch. 2 minutes. The attendant extinguished the lamps behind the counter and withdrew. Holmes and I entered the darkened cloakroom opposite. Lestrade concealed himself near the platform gate while his officers took positions along the passage. The station clock began to strike midnight. At the first stroke, a man appeared at the far entrance. He wore a porter's cap and coat. A mail sack hung over one shoulder. He moved slowly, never looking directly toward the left luggage office. "Haldane," I whispered. The man passed the counter. At the third stroke, he stopped. He set down the sack and removed the porter's cap. It was Jonas Pike. His face was bruised. One eye had swollen nearly shut. He held his left arm close to his side. He looked toward the darkness behind him. A second figure entered. Medium height. Brown hair. Clean-shaven. Reading spectacles. Edward Haldane. He carried a revolver inside his coat pocket, its shape visible against the cloth. Haldane remained 10 yards behind Pike. "Open it," he said. Pike approached the counter. The attendant had left a lamp burning inside the office. Its light fell across the numbered boxes. Pike removed a roughly cut brass key from his pocket. "That is not the original," Haldane said. Pike stopped. "It is the only key Ma left me. The original was kept by Gray." "Then perhaps you should ask him." Haldane drew the revolver. "Open the box." Pike placed the key into the lock of compartment 317. It did not turn. Haldane moved closer. "What have you done?" "Nothing." "Try again." Pike forced the key. Metal scraped against metal, but the lock remained closed. Haldane seized him and pressed the revolver against his ribs. "You changed the key." "I never had the original." "You saw the original in the case behind the mirror." 6 weeks ago. I pressed it into wax before returning it. Ma had this copy cut from the impression. And the numbered copy found in Vale's desk. The police have it." Haldane struck him across the face with the revolver. I moved, but Holmes caught my arm. "Not yet." Pike fell against the counter. Haldane took the key and examined it. Then he looked toward the station clock. "You told Clara its contents would be removed at midnight." "I told her what you ordered me to tell her." "You were supposed to bring Holmes." Pike laughed once, despite the blood upon his mouth. "He is cleverer than I am." Haldane raised the revolver. Holmes stepped into the light. "He is also closer." Haldane turned. Lestrade emerged behind him. "Drop it." Chapter 19. Mr. Gray. Haldane pulled Pike against his body and held the revolver beneath his jaw. The plainclothes officers appeared at both ends of the passage. Holmes held the silver-headed cane recovered from Bell Yard loosely in his right hand. "No one moves," Haldane said. His voice was no longer the slow, artificial voice Pike had described. It was sharp, breathless, and very ordinary. Holmes kept his hands visible. You arranged this meeting poorly. I arranged for you to come alone. Inspector Lestrade is offended. I can still kill him. You can kill Pike. You cannot leave the station. I leave with him. No. Haldane pressed the barrel harder against Pike's skin. You misunderstand your position. You misunderstand Pike's value. He knows nothing you still require. He knows where the original key is. Pike never possessed it. Haldane's eyes moved toward box 317. You knew that, Holmes continued. You sent him here because you believed I would open the box for you. You have. No. Then why are you here? To watch you discover that someone reached it first. For the first time, uncertainty appeared on Haldane's face. Holmes turned toward Lestrade. The master key. Lestrade took it from his pocket and passed it to one of the officers. The man inserted it into the lock. The lock opened. Inside lay nothing but a rectangle of faded dust. The box was empty. Haldane stared. No. It has been empty for at least 3 weeks, Holmes said. No. The dust around the edges is undisturbed. Whatever it contained was removed before Julian Marr began his investigation. Haldane looked at Pike. You lied. I never saw inside it. You gave Marr the means to copy the key. I gave him the wax impression. Haldane dragged Pike backward. Holmes moved 1 step closer. Crowe removed the evidence. Haldane's face changed. It was slight, but unmistakable. He could not. Why not? He did not have the. Haldane stopped. The original key. Holmes asked. The one kept by Mr. Gray. Haldane said nothing. You were Mr. Gray in Montague Place, Lestrade said. No. You recruited the actors. I carried out his instructions. Holmes studied him. Then Mr. Gray was another man. Haldane's silence answered him. You arranged the disguises. No. You killed Marr. Haldane's hand tightened around the revolver. He was supposed to listen. Holmes's voice remained quiet. To whom? No answer. Crowe. Haldane's eyes betrayed him again. Marr discovered the loans, Holmes said. He discovered the 7 men. He sent Crowe an invitation to the Langham. Crowe showed it to you. You answered in his place. Marr discovered the loans, Holmes said. He discovered the 7 men. After Pike dressed him as Vale, he sent word to Crowe proposing a meeting at the Langham. You intercepted the message and replied in Crowe's name. Marr chose to wear Vale's face. And you chose to shoot him. He thought he could frighten us. Us, Holmes repeated. Haldane realized his error. Lestrade moved forward. The revolver swung toward him. Holmes threw the silver-headed cane. It struck Haldane's wrist. The shot exploded beneath the iron roof. Pigeons burst from the rafters. Glass shattered above the counter. Pike dropped to the floor. I reached him as the officers seized Haldane. He fought with unexpected strength, but Lestrade struck the revolver from his hand and forced him against the wall. Haldane's spectacles fell and broke beneath his boot. For an instant, without the glasses, the altered hair and the controlled posture, he resembled no one I had seen before. Then I understood. He resembled all of them. Not in his features, but in fragments. The tilt of the head used by Pike. The nervous throat clearing described by Mercer. The deliberate movements of the clubman. Haldane had not merely recruited the 7 Vales. He had taught each man by lending him part of himself. Pike groaned. The bullet had missed him, but he winced sharply when I touched his side. I suspected that one of his ribs had been broken. As I examined him, he seized my wrist. Clara. Safe. His eyes closed with relief. Lestrade handcuffed Haldane. You are arrested for the murders of Julian Marr and Alfred Sykes. Haldane looked toward Holmes. I did not kill the watchman. You brought him to Marr's office, Holmes said. I paid him to let me in. He was alive when I left. Who remained inside? Haldane said nothing. Crow. No. The man who later removed the original papers from box 317. Haldane laughed bitterly. You think there were papers? What was stored here? Haldane looked at the open compartment. Nothing that would help you. Then why risk murder to reach it? I did not. You abducted Pike and threatened Miss Whitcomb to bring me here. To see whether you had the key. You could have searched me at any time. Not without Crow learning I had done it. Lestrade stepped closer. Then Crow is behind this. Haldane looked at him. Prove it. We have your statement. You have nothing. You said us. A word is not a confession. You used Crow's office. I was his chief clerk. You used his seal and his typewriter. Neither was kept secret. You witnessed the fraud. I prepared legal documents for a client. Lestrade's face darkened. Holmes watched Haldane with a curious expression. You are still protecting him. I am protecting myself. Crow has already abandoned you. Haldane smiled. Then why has he not abandoned London? Haldane was led away. Pike was placed upon a bench while I bound his ribs. He told us that Haldane, dressed as a constable, had removed him from his cell with forged transfer papers. Haldane had then taken him to Clara's house and forced him to repeat the story about box 317. He wanted Holmes here, Pike said. Why? I asked. To see if he could open it. Did you know it was empty? No. Did Ma tell you what should have been inside? Pike hesitated. Names. The 7 actors. The people who paid for Vale. The banks, the witnesses, the money. Crow's name. Pike looked toward Holmes. Yes. Lestrade heard him. That is enough. No, Holmes said. Pike saw no list. Ma told him that it existed. You believe Ma lied. I believe Ma wanted Pike to repeat the story if anything happened to him. Why invent evidence? To make the guilty men search for it. I looked at the empty box. Ma created a trap. Yes. His murder sprang it. But Crow already emptied the box. There was never any list inside. Lestrade stared. The luggage box, the key, the hidden case. Props. Created by Ma. No. By Crow. Box 317 gave the actors a method of passing keys, payments and instructions without meeting. Ma learned of it and allowed Haldane to believe he had hidden his complete evidence there. Then what did Crow remove 3 weeks ago? The final payments and the original records of the fraud. He believed the operation was finished. Lestrade looked toward the passage through which Haldane had been taken. Haldane will testify. Not while he believes Crow can save him. He has just admitted enough to hang. Which makes Crow his only hope. Lestrade folded his arms. Then we arrest Crow tonight. On whose evidence? Haldane's words. Ma's list. The loans. All explained by the ordinary work of a solicitor and the crimes of a dishonest clerk. We know he is guilty. A jury must do more than know. Holmes picked up the brass key. We require Crow to act. Act how? Haldane has now been captured. Crow will destroy anything that connects them. He has had days to do so. He believes one piece remains beyond his reach. What piece? Holmes looked toward Pike. The evidence Julian Marr claimed to possess. But it does not exist. Crow does not know that. Lestrade's eyes narrowed. You intend to use the same lie twice? No. Holmes closed the empty compartment. I intend to improve it. At Baker Street, shortly before 2 in the morning, Holmes composed a letter. It was addressed to Alistair Crow. Sir, Mr. Edward Haldane has made a complete statement concerning Edmund Vale and the death of Julian Marr. His account is supported by a list recovered from Marr's private files. For security, I have returned that list to the compartment in which Marr intended it to be found. I shall be beside luggage box 317 this evening at 11. Come alone. Holmes signed it. I read the page twice. Haldane made no complete statement. No. There is no list. No. And Crow knows box 317 is empty. Yes. Then why would he come? Holmes sealed the letter with plain red wax. Because I have told him 3 things. That Haldane confessed, that Marr left a list and that you will be at Victoria. 4 things. What is the 4th? That I do not yet understand the entire crime. Do you? Holmes placed the letter beside the lamp. Yes. Then tell me. This evening. Why not now? Because Crow has arranged an ending for Edmund Vale. Holmes extinguished the lamp. I should like to see whether he chooses the same ending for Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 20. The Death of Edmund Vale. That evening, Victoria Station was nearly deserted. A light rain tapped against the glass roof. The final train for Brighton had departed, leaving only a few porters, 2 railway officials and a solitary woman asleep beneath the great clock. Holmes stood before luggage box 317. He wore his long black coat and carried the silver-headed cane recovered from Bell Yard. His hands were empty. Lestrade and 3 officers waited behind the wall of the adjoining parcel office. I stood in the darkened cloakroom from which Holmes and I had watched Haldane the previous night. The station clock showed 3 minutes before 11. Crow arrived precisely on time. He wore a dark overcoat and carried a closed umbrella. He approached without haste, his narrow face composed and his gloved hands resting upon the silver handle. Mr. Holmes. Mr. Crow. I received your letter. That was my intention. Crow looked toward the row of iron compartments. You chose an unnecessarily theatrical location. Edmund Vale was a theatrical creation. It seemed appropriate that he should end where he began. You claim Mr. Haldane has confessed. He has. Then I suggest you give his statement to the police. I intend to. What do you want from me? The truth. Crow smiled faintly. Truth is generally the most expensive item in any negotiation. I am not negotiating. Then why invite me? Holmes placed one hand upon the door of compartment 317. Marr's list. Crow's gaze moved to the lock. You informed me that the list had already been recovered. It was. And you returned it here. To the place where you believed Marr had hidden it. Crow's expression did not alter. You assume I knew of this compartment. You knew the box was connected with Marr's investigation. A reasonable deduction from your letter. My letter did not say that Marr had used it. For the first time, Crow hesitated. Only for an instant. Then his composure returned. You asked me to meet you beside the box. The connection was obvious. Obvious to a man who already understood its purpose. Crow rested both hands upon the handle of his umbrella. You claim Mr. Haldane made a complete statement. He described Edmund Vale, the 7 actors and the payments conducted through your office. Then your case is against Haldane. He also described Mr. Gray. Haldane was grey. Sometimes. Crow said nothing. The room at Montague Place was designed to conceal more than a face, Holmes continued. The speaking tube disguised the voice and allowed either of 2 men to conduct the interviews. Pike met Haldane. Bell met you. You cannot prove that. Bell remembered one habit. Whenever you listened closely, your right thumb moved across the edge of your left cuff. You made the same movement in your office yesterday. Crow's hands became still. You and Haldane both used the name Gray, Holmes said. You divided that identity as carefully as you divided Edmund Vale. A clever construction. Your construction. You flatter me. You created Vale because no single imposter could survive close examination. Bell knew the accounts but not the fiancé. Pike knew the fiancé but not the club. Crane knew India but nothing about shipping. Each man supplied one convincing fragment. And yet the deception was discovered. Because fragments can be assembled. Crow glanced toward the station clock. You have not explained what this supposed list contains. 7 actors. 5 lending institutions. 3 sets of forged securities. Instructions signed by Edward Haldane and payment records bearing your authorization. Then you have everything you require. Not quite. What is missing? The connection between Alistair Crow and Mr. Gray. Crow looked at the numbered compartment. You expect to find it inside. I already have. Then why return the evidence? Because removing it from police custody created one final opportunity. For what? To discover who possessed the original key. Crow smiled. You invite me to a railway station and ask me for a key I do not possess. Is this the great method of Sherlock Holmes? No. The method began when I informed you that Ma's list had been returned to box 317. You expected me to believe you. I expected you to come. And here I am. Yes. Crow looked around the empty passage. No police. Would you have come if you believed they were here? No. Then let us continue to believe they are not. Crow studied Holmes's face. What irregularity did you wish to discuss? Holmes removed the broken spectacles taken from Ma's body. Julian Ma was not intended to die outside the Langham. Crow's gaze rested upon the fractured frame. Thomas Wren was. Then your intended victim remains alive. Wren was the 7th actor. He made no regular appearances because he was reserved for the end. When the fraud was complete, he was to become Vale before witnesses for the first and final time. To be murdered. To provide Edmund Vale with a body. Yet Wren escaped. Ma took his place. Pike gave him the disguise, and Ma sent you a message proposing a meeting at the Langham. Haldane intercepted the correspondence and recognized an opportunity. Ma chose to wear Vale's face. And Haldane chose to shoot him. Crow gave a small shrug. An ingenious theory. Haldane arranged the cab and fired the shots. He also summoned Mercer and ensured Miss Whitcomb would be waiting inside the hotel. The corpse had to be identified immediately by people who knew different versions of Vale. You cannot connect me to Haldane's decision. No. Haldane acted without consulting you. Crow's eyes sharpened. Why do you imagine that? Because he altered the plan. Wren disappeared after learning that another man had died in his place. Haldane then tried to recover Ma's evidence for himself. He removed Pike from custody, threatened Clara Whitcomb and lured us to this station. You give my clerk remarkable independence. He learned it from his employer. Crow looked again at box 317. If Haldane acted against me, why should his statement be believed? It should not. That is why I required proof from you. Crow laughed quietly. And you imagined I would provide it. I knew you could not afford to leave without whatever Ma had placed inside this box. Ma placed nothing there. Holmes's eyes narrowed. You sound certain. The box formed part of Vale's arrangement at Victoria. Haldane may have mentioned it. He did not. Then Pike did. Pike never saw inside it. Crow considered him. A distant door closed somewhere upon the concourse. The sound travelled beneath the iron roof and faded. At what hour will the police collect this list? Crow asked. 11:15. Crow looked toward the clock. 11:10. You have 5 minutes, Holmes said. Crow's smile disappeared. There is no list. Ma possessed names, suspicions, and transaction records. Nothing directly connected me to Haldane's crimes. If such evidence existed, Inspector Lestrade would have arrested me this morning. Holmes said nothing. You required me to come here, Crow continued. You require the original key. Yes. And you expect me to produce it merely because you have pointed toward a locked door. No. I expect necessity to produce it. Crow took his right hand from the umbrella. A revolver appeared in it. Open the box. Holmes did not move. I cannot. You brought no key. The police possess 2 copies. Neither opens this lock. Then obtain the master key from the attendant. The attendant has been dismissed for the evening. Crow raised the weapon. You have arranged your trap rather poorly. I arranged for the only man who can open the box to stand before it. Crow's revolver remained fixed upon Holmes's chest. Step aside. Holmes obeyed. Crow approached the compartment but did not touch it. Where are the police? Nearer than you would prefer. Crow glanced toward the parcel office. Nothing moved. You are bluffing. Open the box and discover whether I am. Crow seized Holmes by the collar and pressed the revolver beneath his jaw. I began to move, but Lestrade remained hidden. Through the narrow opening of the cloakroom door, I saw him raise one warning hand. Crow forced Holmes against the iron compartments. If anyone appears, you die first. Then you still require the list. I require whatever Ma discovered. Open the box. Crow stared at him. You are remarkably eager to place your life within reach of a revolver. I am eager to see whether Alistair Crow possesses the property of Mr. Gray. Crow forced Holmes lower against the compartments. Keeping the revolver beneath his jaw, he reached inside his waistcoat. He removed a brass key. The original. Even from the cloakroom, I recognized its oval head and long, intricate teeth. It was not the roughly cut copy found in Vale's desk, nor the key Ma had made from Pike's wax impression. Crow inserted it into the lock. It turned cleanly. He pulled open the iron door. The compartment was empty. Crow stared into it. His grip loosened. Holmes drove his elbow into Crow's ribs. The revolver fired. The bullet struck the station clock. The woman sleeping beneath it sprang to her feet and tore away her bonnet. Inspector Lestrade leveled his revolver. Drop it, Crow. The parcel office door opened. 3 officers rushed into the passage. Crow seized Holmes and dragged him backward. No one comes closer. Lestrade stopped. You are surrounded. I require only one exit. You will not reach it. I shall if you prefer Mr. Holmes alive. Holmes remained remarkably calm. You have already lost. Crow pressed the barrel against his neck. I possess a weapon and a hostage. You also possess the original key. Crow glanced toward the open compartment. That instant was enough. Holmes struck his wrist with the silver-headed cane. The revolver fell beneath the counter. Lestrade and 2 officers seized Crow before he could recover. He struggled once, then stopped. His composure had deserted him. Without it, his face appeared older and strangely smaller. Lestrade removed the brass key from the lock. This connects you to box 317. It connects him to Mr. Gray, Holmes said. The box was used to pass keys, instructions, and payments between the men playing Vale. Only the person directing them possessed the original. Crow looked into the empty compartment. There was no list. No. Haldane made no complete statement. Not when I wrote the letter. Crow faced Holmes. You risked your life for an empty box. I risked yours. Lestrade placed the handcuffs upon him. Alistair Crow, I arrest you for conspiracy, fraud, and the murder of Alfred Sykes. Crow's face became cold again. Sykes. He admitted Haldane to Ma's office, Holmes said. Haldane paid him and left him alive. Sykes then examined Ma's papers and discovered Pike's address. He tried to sell what he knew. You cannot prove that I met him. You went to Ma's office after Haldane. Sykes admitted you because he expected payment. You killed him in the rear room and searched for Ma's evidence. The police found no evidence that I had been there. They found printer's ink upon the outer window ledge. This morning, I traced the only practical route across the adjoining roofs. It passed over Barstow's printing works, where the same ink was used. Crowe glanced involuntarily at the cuff of his coat. His expression altered. Only slightly. But enough. You burned the coat, Holmes continued. Unfortunately, Sykes kept a record of the sum he demanded. The same payment appears in your private ledger. You have not seen my private ledger. No. Holmes looked toward Lestrade. But Mr. Haldane knows where it is. Crowe's eyes moved to him. Haldane will hang. He will testify first. He will say whatever saves him. Yes, Holmes said. That is why your possession of the original key matters. Crowe looked at the numbered disc now resting in Lestrade's hand. For the first time since I had seen him, he appeared afraid. Haldane fired the shots, he said. Pike deceived the woman. Bell stole the securities. Wren fled. Marr chose to wear Vale's face. Yet you call me the criminal. You selected men whose weaknesses could be used against them, Holmes said. Debt, fear, pride, love. You divided the crime so that each participant believed himself only slightly dishonest. And they agreed. Yes. Then perhaps Edmund Vale existed after all. Holmes looked at him. He existed wherever responsibility was absent. That was your finest construction. Crowe was led away. 3 days later, Holmes and I sat before the fire in Baker Street while he explained the details that had remained unclear to me. Haldane confessed after learning that Crowe had been arrested. He admitted killing Julian Marr, binding Pike at Bell Yard and opening the gas before escaping through the rear window in one of the waiting Vale disguises. He also admitted recruiting 5 of the 7 actors and supervising their transformations. Crowe had personally recruited Bell and Latham, whose positions gave them access to Mercer's bonds and the lending institutions. Henry Cartwright had never existed. Haldane had appeared under that name when proposing Vale for membership at the Albion Club. Crowe later claimed that Cartwright had introduced Vale to his firm, allowing him to place another fictitious man between himself and the fraud. Haldane had also arranged Vale's introduction to Clara Whitcomb. A woman connected with the charitable dinner had been paid to introduce Vale to Clara's aunt, who afterward presented him at the Lydian Society concert. Even the apparent accident by which Clara met her future husband had been carefully constructed. Haldane revealed the location of a private document chest rented in Crowe's name. The original instructions, payment records, and transfer documents recovered from it matched Marr's notes. A numbered receipt inside the chest established Crowe's control of box 317. The stolen money had passed through accounts in Belgium and Switzerland before reaching a private bank in Paris. Most of it was eventually recovered. Thomas Wren was arrested in a lodging house in Southampton. He had never intended to travel to Dover. Holmes had correctly recognized the marked timetable as a deception. Nathaniel Wicks was found alive in a private sanatorium outside London. Admission papers bearing Crowe's authorization proved that the solicitor had arranged his confinement under a false name after Wicks threatened to reveal the 7 identical suits. Frederick Bell received a reduced sentence in return for his testimony. The other actors were charged according to the extent of their knowledge. Jonas Pike was released. And Clara? I asked. Holmes reached for his pipe. She knows the truth. That was not my question. No. It was a request for gossip disguised as concern. Did Pike love her? Undoubtedly. Did she love him? She loved Edmund Vale. That sounds rather hopeless. Not entirely. Of all the men who played Vale, Pike was the only one who gave the character something not written in Crowe's instructions. What was that? Regret. Holmes struck a match. I thought of Julian Marr dying upon the pavement before the Langham. He had uncovered the deception, yet in attempting to expose it had become its most convincing victim. There is one matter I still do not understand, I said. Marr's final words. There were 7. Was he warning us about the actors? Yes. How could he know we would understand? He could not. A dying man does not compose an argument. He offers the most important fact he can still speak. And it was enough. It was very nearly not enough. Holmes leaned back in his chair. Crow's mistake was the same one made by many men who believe themselves clever. He assumed that because each witness knew only one part of the truth, no one could reconstruct the whole. And you did. No, Watson. They did. He pointed toward my notes. Miss Whitcomb gave us the left hand. Mercer gave us the right. Beaumont gave us the blue lenses. Pike gave us the 7 actors. Bell gave us the safe. Marr gave us the loans. Sykes gave us the window. None possessed the solution. But together, they created Edmund Vale for the second time. Outside, the bells marked the hour. A carriage passed through Baker Street, its wheels hissing upon the wet road. I closed my notebook. Edmund Vale had possessed a name, several addresses, a profession, friends, and even a woman who loved him. He had possessed everything required of a life except the inconvenience of ever having lived. Yet a man had died in his place, and for several extraordinary days, all of London had searched for his murderer.